FPS Win. Written by
嘟嘟雪球
Chapter 333. After determining the target, Chen Chen did not hesitate or waste time. Instead, he quickly led the team out after packing up his equipment. The journey was uneventful, but after 3 hours, everyone arrived at Kandari City and found the Indo wholesale supermarket located in the center of the storm. This supermarket is located on the south side of Medusa Street. 500 meters to the north is Kandari Bay. The diesel processing workshop is just a few dozen meters next to Indo supermarket. It is surrounded by dense woods, and there are only a few houses nearby. However, because it is close to the bay, there are several seafood processing factories nearby. This is a desolate area in the prosperous city of Kandari. Chen Chen was even amazed that those extremists could accurately find such a base. The Toyota Land Cruiser of Qingshan Group stopped next to a coffee shop on the street in Medusa. The 4 people, who were not carrying any equipment, drank coffee while observing the situation in the supermarket. The warehouse and cold storage are adjacent to each other, just like all large supermarkets. The cold storage should mainly contain seafood and other meat products. Argus said before that they tried to use police dogs to search, but they didn't find any traces of nail polish remover. The police dogs just circled around the warehouse. They probably looked pretty weird at first, like the nail polish remover had just disappeared. But now it seems that's it. As expected, something must be fishy when things are out of the ordinary. This batch of nail polish remover should have never left the supermarket and has been stored in the cold storage. The strong smell of seafood covered up the pungent sweet smell of acetone, causing the police dog to lose its way. It was normal that it couldn't find the dog. So, the operation of those JD molecules is very simple. They don't need to intervene in any aspect of the whole process. They just wait quietly for their chance. This thing will definitely be shipped to the warehouse of Indo Supermarket. Even if I don't have the chance to buy it the first time, I will still have time to buy it when the goods are returned. Maybe the only problem is how they can convince Indo Supermarket and the big customer to import acetone at the same time. This is the crux of the problem. After hearing Chen Chen's analysis, Dakai nodded thoughtfully, and then asked, "So if we want to catch the person behind this, we should talk to that big client?" Chen Chen shook his head and denied it. That's totally unnecessary. The other party can't possibly leave any loopholes. Perhaps the other party just left some information through a very covert channel, or even used psychological suggestion to lure big customers into the trap. They don't need to choose a supermarket because once they have identified a major customer, the supermarket is actually also identified. The cooperative relationship is fixed, just like when we wanted to buy guns and equipment in Pubay before, we basically went to Wanfeng Group. These people are really smart. Yam, they are definitely not comparable to those mud-legged warlords in Pubay. At this point, Chen Chen had already finished the last sip of coffee in the cup. It was already 6 p.m., the time to get off work, and Indo Supermarket began to get busy. Looking at the crowds of people coming and going, Chen Chen realized that the time was ripe, so he stood up decisively and said, "Let's go and take a look." Now is the time when warehouse management is the most lax. It is also the time when basically all supermarket cold storages open their doors for ventilation and replenishment. We have to find a way to sneak into their cold storages and find that batch of acetone. We don't need to do much, just make sure the goods are inside and call the police directly. They don't have time to move. The police can handle the next thing. Clear. Everyone immediately followed Chen Chen. They got back into the car, put on their holsters, and set off again. This time, they parked their car directly in the parking lot of Indo Supermarket, then walked directly into the supermarket and picked up 2 folding ladders and a household toolbox from the shelf. Li Bang didn't understand what this was for at first, but Chen Chen quickly answered his question. If you want to sneak into a place that non-staff members should not be able to enter at the lowest cost, a ladder is your best pass. Now, if one isn't enough, we can bring 2. Just wait and see. When we enter the cold storage later, there will be absolutely no one who can stop us. Is this true? Li Bang asked in disbelief, but Chen Chen did not answer. He walked out of the supermarket, found a place to tear off the labels of the ladder and toolbox, threw the things on the ground, and rubbed them hard a few times. After making them look old with mud, he confidently carried the ladder and walked in front, heading towards the cold storage. They met several groups of staff along the way, but everyone ignored them. Advertisement: when they arrived at the door of the cold storage, a large batch of seafood had just arrived. The workers were busy unloading and transporting the goods, and they hardly even glanced at Chen Chen. Instead, Chen Chen took the initiative to walk up and asked in the Indonesian he had learned at the last minute, "Which light is broken?" The other party didn't even raise his head and answered with words that Chen Chen couldn't understand. Chen Chen also shook his head and walked straight into the cold storage. He kept observing the overhead lights all the way, pretending that he was really a professional plumber, but in fact, his peripheral vision was always scanning the guide signs of the cold storage. It didn't take him much time to find the target cold storage fresh-keeping area. The temperature of this partition is generally between -5 and 0 degrees, although it cannot fully meet the temperature requirement of 4 to 10 degrees before TATP manufacturing. Considering the temperature increase during the transportation and waiting process of raw materials, this is the most suitable partition for storage. At the same time, this is also the place with the most fresh ice fish, and the smell is quite strong, which is very suitable as a distraction. The 4 of them walked around the fresh-keeping area and basically got a clear understanding of the layout of this area, but then problems arose. The goods here were the most in the entire cold storage with densely packed cardboard boxes and plastic boxes. It was too difficult to find possible acetone from this pile of goods. If something is pressed at the deepest part, but this does not seem possible because it does not conform to the principle of easy access by those JD molecules. That is to say, they should hide the nail polish remover in the pile of goods with the lowest turnover and outbound rates and the least attention. Most of the food in the medium temperature zone is fresh food, and there are only a few kinds of goods that must be stored at low temperatures but have a low turnover rate. Ice cream, bulk frozen cream, small amounts of medicine, special types of beverages, and of course the bagged crushed ice that is inevitably used in the fresh food area. Chen Chen searched among these goods, but he found no trace of large quantities of nail polish remover. Logically speaking, this thing should be quite large. Chen Chen couldn't help but frown. He even suspected that he had guessed wrong. But at this moment, he suddenly discovered that there was something wrong with the broken ice in his hand. It's not like ice cubes because it doesn't feel that cold. His heart skipped a beat, and he immediately raised his head. The intuition of danger instantly enveloped him, and without any hesitation, he drew the pistol from his waist and raised it, looking around. At this moment, the two workers who had been in charge of moving things in the frozen area stopped their work. They reached under the shelf, as if they wanted to take something out. Chen Chen was 1 second faster than them. It was this 1 second that allowed him to aim at the opponent in advance. When the other party just raised the gun in his hand, Chen Chen's crosshairs had already locked on their heads. Bang! Bang! There were 2 consecutive gunshots, which were fired by Chen Chen and Li Bang one after another. The 2 bodies fell down immediately. However, Li Bang didn't know what had happened at this time. What's going on? He asked in surprise. Chen Chen literally took a breath and then replied, damn it, we made a mistake. This cold storage is not used to store acetone. It is used to store TATP. They have already made TATP. There is a mole in the cold storage manager. Dakai, call the police immediately. It's full of explosives. It's a powder keg. If we let them detonate it, the whole supermarket will be blown away. Check if there are any explosive devices around and clear all the people in the cold storage. We have to wait until the police arrive. Chen Chen knew that he was really dancing on the edge of a knife this time. What is TATP? The shock wave overpressure it generates can reach 70% of TNT. Just 1 kilogram of TP can easily blow a house into pieces. And here behind Chen Chen, those special ice packs weigh at least hundreds of kilograms. If it is detonated, let alone the 4-member Dongfeng Corps, who are only a few meters away from the explosive, at least half of the civilians shopping in the supermarket will be torn into powder by the shockwave. EIM really wanted to do something big, and they were almost successful. Sure, Dakai had already called the police, and he was still nervously looking for traces of possible wireless detonators. And every second he spent searching in silence added more pressure to Chen Chen's heart. At this moment, Chen Chen was really fed up with the telecommunications companies represented by Huawei and ZTE. What on earth are you thinking? The subway has no signal, so you install a base station for people. The elevator has no signal, so you install a base station for people. Now the cold storage has no signal, so you also install a base station for people? Is this really necessary? If you are worried about security, can't you just use limited communication methods to contact us? Why do we need to deploy cellular networks in places like this? Now I'm standing in front of a pile of explosives. I can't run away, and I can't stay away from running away. And there are a group of JD elements who are eyeing me with greed, and they may be able to blow me up with just a few clicks. That's enough. Chen Chen subconsciously moved forward a few steps, crossing the rows of shelves to gain a better view for himself. Li Bang and Lin, he had already begun clearing out other civilians in the cold storage. With their constant shouting and warning shots, the surrounding space was cleared in an instant. 1 minute has passed, the signal must have been transmitted, and those JD elements must have known what happened here. If they have explosives in their hands, they could detonate them at any second. But Chen Chen couldn't leave. He had to make sure there were no living people in the area behind them. Because as long as there are living people, they may be the accomplices of JD elements. And as long as there is an insider, he could explode his body when the 4-man group is halfway through their run and bury all 4 of them in the cold storage. That's right. Chen Chen is not some great and glorious character who would disregard his own name in order to save others. All his decisions, in the final analysis, are still for the sake of keeping himself alive. The current situation is like a gamble, or in other words, it is like the game of passing the parcel that Chen Chen played when he first joined the Special Operations Force. The blasting cord in your hand is about to explode, but you can't be afraid or nervous. You can only do all the right things under great pressure, and then you can get rid of it smoothly and save your life. And right now, there are only 3 right things. Call the police, clear out personnel, and destroy possible explosive devices. The atmosphere was extremely depressing, but Chen Chen's heartbeat became slower and slower. It's not that he wasn't nervous, but the more nervous he was mentally, the more morbidly relaxed his body felt. This feeling of relaxation made him feel a little dizzy and dazed. And at this moment, Sure Dakai behind him finally brought the first good news. No detonator was found. They probably haven't had time to install it yet. That's good. Retreat. Li Bang Lin He. Control the door of the cold storage. Don't let anyone in. Clear. Clear. Everyone answered in turn, and then Chen Chen and Sure Dakai took turns to cover each other and quickly evacuated to the door. At this time, the security guards of the mall had learned of the situation and were rushing over here. When Chen Chen just walked to the door, he saw Lin He and Li Bang, who were behind the bunker, confronting the security guards with guns and loudly identifying themselves to them in rudimentary English. Chen Chen quickly hid behind the bunker and shouted, "We are SMP members. We have police authorization. We found explosives in the cold storage, and we have called the police. We've called the police. Put down your guns. We're not the enemy." These 2 sentences are very effective. Compared with impersonating a police officer, impersonating an SMP seems to be more trustworthy to the security personnel. Li Bang and Lin He had lowered their guns, and the mall security guards also lowered their guns and approached tentatively. He opened his mouth and shouted, "I need your identification. No need to prove it. Set up a perimeter. The police will be here soon. EIM is nearby. We need to dash." Bang. Before Chen Chen could finish his words, suddenly, a gunshot rang out outside the cold storage. Everyone subconsciously froze in place. The security guard lowered his head in surprise and looked at his chest. Then he turned around and looked back, and what greeted him was a round of continuous gunfire. Bang, 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 bang. Hidden. Chen Chen immediately gave the order. In fact, as soon as the gunshot was heard, everyone had already retreated behind the cover. After the security guard fell, a violent hail of bullets immediately fired at the door of the cold storage, completely blocking the 4 people's evacuation route. "Close the door! Close the door!" Li Bang shouted and subconsciously tried to stand up, but Chen Chen beside him suddenly pushed him down. "Are you fucking crazy? You're not wearing a bulletproof vest. Why close the door? Can't they get in? Don't fight back. Retreat back inside, block the door, and let them in." As he spoke, Chen Chen retreated to both sides of the gate, and then quickly retreated using a bilateral formation to alternately cover each other. There are basically no shells in the transition area of the cold storage. Although they are seriously lacking in cover, their speed of movement has also been greatly improved. The gunshots outside the door continued, and the supermarket security personnel were obviously unable to hold on any longer. 5 minutes had passed since Dakai called the police. Chen Chen knew that Dakai had made the information very clear, but until now, the police support had not arrived. No, a large number of police officers from Kandari have been transferred to Laboda. These days, the city's defense is the most empty. What's going on? Is there a connection between the two attacks? Was this a premeditated, coordinated attack? No, it can't be, because according to the translation, the attack launched by JIS in Laboda was organized on the spur of the moment, and they did not reach an agreement with EM. But now, Kandari's EM acted so decisively, even organizing an armed attack directly in the city center after the warehouse was discovered, which means that their intelligence was very accurate and very timely. There must be someone helping them behind the scenes. Taya, MPRI? No matter who it was, Chen Chen had already made a note of it on his list. The gunshots outside the door were still ringing, but even more piercing were the shouts of fear and the chaotic footsteps. People who were shopping in the supermarket had also started to behave abnormally. They were running away frantically and happened to run into the guns of the JD elements who were rushing over. The gunfire from those JD elements was extremely regular and steady, as if they were not carrying out a massacre, but just shooting targets. Yes, they were indeed shooting. They just fired a few shots as they approached the cold storage and drove people back into the supermarket, so that the subsequent explosion could take more innocent lives. Chen Chen took a deep breath and looked around, trying to find any usable equipment in the cold storage, but unfortunately, this was a cold storage, not a warehouse. All he could rely on was the pistol in his hand. The gunshots outside the door were getting closer and closer, and the oppressive power of automatic weapons was fully revealed at this moment. How can I fight at least 6 rifles without a bulletproof vest and only a pistol? I can't even fight CQB. Chen Chen was holding a pistol, and he was less than 30 meters away from the cold storage door. A figure flashed at the door for a moment, and Chen Chen immediately opened fire. However, at such a distance, even if you turned on the automatic aiming and locking, it was impossible to hit the enemy, who was peeking outside the wall in the blink of an eye. Come on, the maximum speed of human reaction is 100 milliseconds, and the transmission time from the trigger pull to the bullet firing is another 100 milliseconds. The flight time of the pistol bullet in the indoor environment is about 50 milliseconds. This is more than 200 milliseconds back and forth. You tell me that you can pass CQB with just a pistol? Nonsense. Without suspense, the bullet fired by Chen Chen hit the air, and soon, he was greeted by a round of fierce faith shooting. The scattered rain of bullets pressed Chen Chen behind the bunker, and Li Bang behind him immediately leaned forward to suppress him. But how do you suppress an enemy who has not appeared? Bullets began to fly in the cold storage, and Chen Chen seemed to be dreaming back to the scene of attacking Wanhanai. Everyone was trapped behind the bunker, unable to look up, and could only wait for slow death. What if ODA was not interrupted but directly broken? Is it really that difficult without the equipment advantage? But at this moment, Chen Chen suddenly had an idea. Advertisement Linhe, retreat. Well, hold on. You go and bring back a few bags of THP. Hold the wait. Go. 30 seconds. Receive. Linhe replied loudly, and then an agile figure shuttled out from the hail of bullets. Chen Chen didn't care about the risk of being hit. He quickly stood up and fired continuously at the door, pushing back the enemy who had already leaned into the cold storage door. This was the first time he saw his enemy clearly. The enemy was actually wearing a bulletproof vest. No wonder they were so reckless in attacking the enemy head-on. They were truly fearless. Damn it. Should I say you were afraid of death or not? Chen Chen didn't have time to think about it. His position was already exposed. A round of accurate shooting would be enough to penetrate the shelf in front of him. Li Bang, cover. He leaped forward and hid behind another cover. As soon as he stabilized his body, he immediately raised his gun, aimed and pulled the trigger, creating conditions for Li Bang to move. Reload! After firing 20 bullets, Dakai, who had never been exposed, finally filled the firepower gap. The enemies at the door were suppressed again, and after a round of seamless cooperation, the trio actually snatched the initiative of ODA back from the enemy. Pay attention to ammunition management. Chen Chen gave the order again. Each of them only carried 3 magazines, which were no longer enough. This was an oversight, but in reality, it was an oversight that was impossible to avoid. Because Chen Chen could not have imagined that these people had already completed the production of TATP and hid such a dangerous explosive in the cold storage. If there was only nail polish remover in the cold storage, how could the resistance of those JD elements be so fierce? Of course, it's too late to say anything now. Chen Chen had already replaced the 3rd magazine, and the enemy at the door had finally decided to launch an attack. Chen Chen shot down the man who was rushing in front with 1 shot, but his 3 accomplices had already raised their guns and aimed at Chen Chen. There was no time to fire a 2nd shot, so Chen Chen could only fall to the side. Li Bang and Dakai raised their guns to shoot and cover, but they were also quickly suppressed. Up to now, there's been only 1 casualty on either side. However, this is the true norm for CQB. In the early stage, both sides were just testing each other. Next, the real high-intensity attack was about to begin. The foursome would not have any room for resistance. Even if they exchanged their lives, they could not defeat the enemy. However, at this moment, Linhe's voice came from Chen Chen's headphones. At 12 o'clock, throw a bag of explosives. Chen Chen did not turn around subconsciously. His eyes were still fixed on the front. A second later, he saw a bag of white powder falling from the air and landing at the door of the cold storage. The world seemed to slow down at this moment. Chen Chen heard his own breathing. The FN-57 sight slowly moved to the lower edge of the bag of powder, and then, when the powder was still 2 meters from the floor, the trigger was pulled and the bullet fired. Chen Chen suddenly felt that all he had done was done. At the same time, an absurd idea popped up in his mind that if this bag was really crushed ice, it would be funny. However, his absurd idea did not become a reality. The moment the bullet passed through the bag of powder, a violent explosion suddenly occurred. Boom! The shockwave swept through the entire cold storage, and Chen Chen was knocked to the ground by the huge force. He could feel blood oozing out of his nose instantly, but he did not stop for a moment, and quickly gave the order. Change speed. Shoot again. In fact, he didn't have to give any orders at all. At the moment of the explosion, Li Bang almost stood up under the shockwave. When everyone including Chen Chen fell into a brief stagnation, he seized the short-time difference of less than 1 second. In this second, he killed the enemy closest to him, who was knocked over by the shockwave. Then he rushed forward and picked up the Type 56 submachine gun that had fallen to the ground, which he was actually very familiar with. Bang, 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 the gunshot rang out again, and this time, blood and flesh flew everywhere under the bullet. Grab the gun, quick! In fact, Chen Chen couldn't hear what he was shouting at all, and he didn't know whether others could hear it. He simply rushed in front of the enemy knocked down by Li Bang, grabbed the rifle, lay down and fired a short burst of shots quickly, suppressing the enemy outside the door who was lucky enough to escape the shockwave. The situation suddenly reversed. Sure Dekai completed the harvest of the other 2 people in the cold storage. Linny also decisively put down the other taps and stepped forward with a pistol to take over Chen Chen's suppression. In just a few seconds, 3 rifles were in hand. Linny half-crouched in front of Chen Chen and fired continuously from his pistol to provide cover, allowing Chen Chen to complete the most critical reloading. Afterwards, the 4 of them took turns to cover each other and moved forward, with bullets flying everywhere at the door of the cold storage. The 4 people who were pushed back into the cold storage finally regained the position 10 meters in front of the door. The enemy began to flee. They seemed to have given up their attack on the cold storage, as sirens finally began to sound in the distance. Chen Chen did not order a pursuit because he knew that the police now did not distinguish between friend and foe. As long as they went out, they would still be treated as JD elements and might even be shot by a volley of bullets. Alert! He spoke again, and the 4 men spread out to the dangerous corners on both sides of the cold storage door, aiming their guns at the door. Gunshots continued to be heard outside the door, and after a moment, a shout was suddenly heard. Allahu Bak streep je boom. There were huge explosions, sounds of breaking glass, and the crowd screams of terror. Inside the cold storage, apart from the vibrations, there was only silence. A few minutes later, the fully armed 88th Task Force found the 4-member Dongfeng core team covered in blood. There is no misunderstanding. Obviously, they have figured out the situation. There was only awe in their eyes as they looked at this team that relied on 4 pistols to repel the crazy attacks of 8 militants. You guys are crazy. Only have a pistol, but thank you. You saved thousands of lives. Hearing the leading man's words, Chen Chen shook his head and replied, "It's useless to say such nonsense. There may still be people at the refinery and explosives. Give us some tubes and follow us. Kill all these people." After walking out of the cold storage, Chen Chen finally saw clearly how much damage these JD elements had caused. The main entrance of the supermarket had almost completely collapsed, with injured people and corpses lying all over the ground. Not far from the center of the explosion, Chen Chen even saw a lot of human body parts torn apart by the shockwave. People were crying everywhere. Perhaps they had lost their relatives or loved ones in the explosion. When the 88th Task Force and its 4-member team passed through the cordon in front of the supermarket, everyone raised their heads at the same time and looked at them with complicated eyes. It is hard to tell whether this look is one of resentment or anger, but it certainly does not contain gratitude. Because in the eyes of most people, the harm they suffered was not caused by JD elements, but because the police responded too slowly. Chen Chen was not disappointed by that look. In fact, he had long been accustomed to being treated like this. Anyway, the victims basically don't blame the criminals because the criminals really dare to kill people. But of course, thinking from another perspective, when people have emotional breakdowns, they always have to find an outlet to vent their emotions. And resenting certain specific objects is always much better than the man who was stopped by the police not far away and frantically tried to reassemble the body of his son who was blown in half, as if this would bring his son back to life. In the face of a huge tragedy, you can't reason with the victims. This is not the sensibility of the Virgin Mary, but the rationality of humanity. Therefore, Chen Chen didn't even glance in their direction. He knew that every second wasted might give the JD elements still in the refinery a better chance of escaping. Is the refinery fenced off? Chen Chen walked quickly forward and asked the leader of Task Force 88 beside him. It has been surrounded. Fortunately, there are still people inside, including armed men. We plan to capture him alive. You don't need to get involved. It's too dangerous. We are going. Chen Chen interrupted the leader and continued. This matter is not over yet. To be honest, I don't believe you can catch anyone. Besides, we are an outsourced force of the police. We may be more convenient than you in some matters. After hearing Chen Chen's words, the team leader paused for a moment, then nodded and replied, Can. But we don't really have RPGs, and we can't use RPGs in urban areas because that would be too radical. You are still too conservative. No matter what means are used to deal with JD elements, it is not radical, right? The team leader showed a bitter expression of knowing it all on his face, and from his reaction, Chen Chen also vaguely realized that something unusual was going on. Task Force 88 is not a monolithic entity. They face the same problems as the police force. Maybe their top brass will resort to all kinds of conspiracies and power trading, but the vast majority of those fighting at the bottom really want to wipe out the JD elements that are wreaking havoc in Indonesia. And it's definitely good news that they are willing to make special efforts to achieve this goal. This means that if he stands on the side of the police in the future and has a conflict of interest with the 88th Task Force one day, the enemy he needs to face may not have a large grassroots base, but is more likely to be a lone commander. While speaking, Chen Chen had led the team to the side of the Land Cruiser. The 4 of them quickly took their equipment from the car and put them on. Seeing this scene, the team leader reacted belatedly. Shit, you're not SMP. You are EW. You killed 4 IS in Jakarta and a large number of JIS in La Boda, right? Chen Chen's heart skipped a beat. He realized that the man across from him had let something slip, revealing information that should have been confined to their group. However, Chen Chen did not show any surprise, but just nodded slightly and replied, "Yes, it is us. That's fine. We do need your help. There are only 6 of us in Kandari's 88th Task Force. It's really not that easy to take down the refinery." There was visible joy on the team leader's face. Chen Chen didn't say much. After he got ready and treated the wound on his face caused by the debris splashed by the explosion, he immediately put on his mask and led the other 3 people to drive to the refinery. At this time, the police and the 88th Task Force had surrounded the not-so-large refinery, but because the situation inside was unclear, they had no way of launching an attack. They could only shout from dozens of meters away, trying to persuade the JD elements inside to surrender. This won't work, they're stalling for time. Chen Chen immediately made his own judgment. Because he knew that a team that could self-destruct at the entrance of a supermarket, how could it be possible for them to stay in the refinery? Because they were afraid of death. They must have other purposes. And no matter what their purpose is, they must hurry up. But we can't get in. If we rush in blindly, it is likely to cause a new round of casualties. We can only clear the surrounding area as much as possible and then evacuate the personnel. It's too late. Chen Chen interrupted the leader again, and then said to Lin He, "Number 5, release the drones, release the unmanned vehicles, and complete the reconnaissance of the refinery." Clear. Lin He took action immediately, and as the drone took off, the team leader could no longer hide the shock on his face. "Damn drone, there are also driverless cars? Who are the special forces? Why don't we have what you have?" However, he didn't have time to sigh too much at this time because just a few dozen seconds later, the 2 screens in front of Lin, he showed the pictures of the interior of the oil refinery taken from the air and the ground. In fact, this refinery, or refinery workshop, is a courtyard-style building with 3 closely arranged buildings within a 2-meter-high wall. At this time, there was no one to be seen in the yard. It was obvious that all the JD members were hiding inside the building. Chen Chen acted decisively and ordered the remote control car carrying the C4 explosives brought by Task Force 88 to break through the door. The principle of this thing is very simple. Install a timed detonator on the C4, use the camera telescopic rod to throw the C4 in front of the door, and then just wait for the detonator to be fired from a distance. Everything has been deployed and Task Force 88 is ready. They didn't really intend to attack, but to use the explosion to create a deterrent and try to scare out the rats hiding in the rat holes. The team leader nervously watched the images sent back by the unmanned vehicle, holding his M4 tightly in his hand. As long as the enemy on the opposite side stuck their heads out after the explosion, he would order to shoot without hesitation. Half a minute later, the tracked unmanned vehicle slowly approached the gate of the refinery yard. After adjusting the direction several times, the unmanned vehicle successfully placed the C4 against the thin iron door. "There is 1 minute left for the detonator to detonate," the leader of Task Force 88 said a little nervously. Lin He nodded, and then the unmanned vehicle began to retreat. A minute later, the explosion sounded as expected. Boom! The directional shock wave blew away the iron gate of the courtyard, and the smoke and dust rays temporarily obscured everyone's vision. But inside the courtyard, the JD elements hiding did not react at all. At least, from the drone's perspective, they didn't react. Chen Chen's brows furrowed. "Are you sure there's someone else inside?" "Advertisement, absolutely." The leader replied firmly. "Is there a possible secret passage?" "I don't know, but it's unlikely." "That's strange." Chen Chen looked at the drone screen again. This time, from a side angle, he finally saw a figure flashing inside the building. There are indeed people inside. But why the nothing happening? Logically speaking, under such a besieged situation, the people inside should have rushed out shouting Allah Habakara and risked their lives, but now, they actually held back? Even if it was to delay time, it was too much to delay it to this extent. Unless what they really want to delay is not the time measured in minutes, but in seconds. Maybe all they need is a few extra seconds? What are they waiting for? Waiting for rescue? Chen Chen's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately shouted, "Number 5, drone raises. Observe the surrounding environment and check for suspicious vehicles. Receive." And just a few seconds later, Lin He shouted hurriedly, "A vehicle is approaching at high speed. Disperse, disperse." Chen Chen was confused. He subconsciously glanced at the leader of Task Force 88, and the meaning expressed in his eyes was very clear. "Where are your roadblocks?" But it was too late to say anything now. Almost in the blink of an eye, the suspicious vehicle that Lin He had mentioned appeared in his sight at high speed. It is a very common Toyota sedan. It was approaching at full speed, and the only thing Chen Chen could do was to pull everyone away and flee in the opposite direction. That's right, it was impossible to intercept it. Unless there is a heavy machine gun, the engine compartment of the vehicle can be directly smashed. Otherwise, in the few seconds you try to shoot the driver, he will be able to drive into your face and blow you to pieces. "Run!" Chen Chen shouted at the top of his lungs. In the few seconds when Toyota approached, the 4-man team of the Dongfeng Corps moved away by nearly 30 meters. Afterwards, Chen Chen subconsciously grabbed Lin He and threw him behind the flower bed near the supermarket parking lot, and he fell to the ground right after him. Almost at this moment, boom! A devastating explosion sounded, and more than 200 meters behind them, a huge mushroom cloud slowly rose. The overpressure shock wave swept across a radius of tens of meters, tearing the police's defense line into pieces. At the nearest place, a police car was blown away and then fell nearly 10 meters away. The storm spread rapidly with smoke and dust, and the area several hundred meters away from the center of the explosion suddenly became dark as if the lights were turned off. After falling, Chen Chen supported his body in a standard forward fall posture, avoiding direct damage from the shockwave. But even so, he still felt as if his chest was hit by a heavy hammer and was in unbearable pain. This is an explosion with a TNT equivalent of at least 100 kilograms. There must be an important figure in the refinery to force these JD elements to use such a risky rescue method that may even kill their own people. Everyone report status. Chen Chen shouted loudly, and his eardrums, which had just recovered, began to buzz again. No one answered him, of course. Maybe he didn't hear it. He stumbled to his feet and checked the conditions of the others one by one. Fortunately, he reacted quickly enough and led everyone away from the center of the explosion, so there were no casualties. Verbal communication became meaningless, so Chen Chen pulled everyone together and quickly made a set of gestures. Enemy, rescue. Intercept. 2 groups, take turns covering. Clear. After a quick communication, the 4 people stood up immediately. The leader of Task Force 88 was completely dumbfounded. He had never experienced such a high-intensity battle. At this moment, he didn't even know what he should do. However, after seeing the 4-member Dongfeng Corps group take action, he quickly followed and tried to organize his own team. But unfortunately, his efforts were in vain. At least 3 of the 6 team members who mixed in with the police and assisted in the siege have fallen. Not to mention finding them. We don't even know where their bodies are now. There was a look of despair in the team leader's eyes, but Chen Chen didn't have time to care about him because the moment he left the bunker, he saw 2 Hilux pickup trucks approaching rapidly. Suppressive fire. Chen Chen made a gesture again, and then, without any further delay, the 4 HK-416s opened fire immediately. Without a bulletproof design, ambushing the vehicle is too easy. The armor-piercing bullets, which seemed to have a bit of excessive damage, penetrated the thin iron sheets of civilian cars, especially Japanese civilian cars, without any hindrance. The JD elements inside died in the cab before they even had time to stop the car. Under the action of inertia, the vehicle continued to move forward for a distance. The militants in the back seat found an opportunity to jump out of the car, but the bullets from the Dongfeng Corps had already bitten them like a poisonous snake. In half a minute, more than half of the 12 people in the 2 vehicles had been killed. The 4-man team took turns changing magazines to maintain suppression. At this time, the police force that was not completely destroyed by the explosion finally came to its senses. The sounds of pistols, light submachine guns, and rifles rang out one after another. Those JD elements probably never imagined that after such an earth-shattering explosion, the police would still be able to fight back. Oh Allah, are these really Indonesian police? But they have definitely opened fire. These grassroots police officers are unprofessional and indeed cowardly. But when they found that they had no choice but to fight and their big brother was leading the team, they still burst out with a desire to survive. In less than a minute, even the policeman who was lying on the ground with broken legs emptied his magazine before fainting. The militants in the pickup truck were completely suppressed. At this time, the important target in the refinery finally showed up. 6 militants wearing bulletproof vests protected a man who rushed out of the blown-open gate and attacked from the front and back together with the militants on the side of the pickup truck, trying to break out. But Chen Chen will not give them this opportunity. He was always observing the side of the refinery with his peripheral vision, and the moment he saw the figure at the door, the muzzle of his gun moved. Kick! Kick! He shouted loudly. Then, the muzzles of the 4 men's guns all turned, and bullets were fired densely at the opponent's unprotected lower body. In fact, Chen Chen knew that in a tense, high-intensity battle, it was a very, very ridiculous thing to ask team members to aim and shoot at non-lethal parts. Not to mention in a real battle. Even in a police hostage rescue operation, you can't ask a sniper to conduct non-lethal shooting, because the excessive pursuit of accuracy will seriously reduce the killing efficiency. And once the killing efficiency is reduced, it will inevitably lead to uncontrollable vicious consequences. But this is only true in general. The 4 HK-416s of the 4-man team were all equipped with ACOG sights, with a distance of more than 100 meters and 4x magnification. If they can't even hit the opponent's legs in this situation, then all the battles fought by the 4 people can be said to have been fought in vain. What's more, there was no side cover on the road to break out from the main gate of the refinery. The 7 people could be said to have appeared under the guns of the Dongfeng Corps like running naked, without any defense or cover. So, after a round of volleys, 4 of the 7 people were shot in the legs, including the man in the white robe who was protected in the middle. Of course, this does not mean that the other 3 were not shot. In fact, the moment they passed through the narrow gate and the foreseeable route, the group was completely shot through by the Dongfeng Corps. Those who were not shot in the legs were basically shot in the torso. In just a few seconds, all 7 people fell down. The process cannot be said to be quick, it should be described as hasty. But this is the battlefield. This is the real confrontation. Those JD elements made many correct decisions, including holding their ground and waiting for help, launching a second attack, and breaking out with a pincer attack. But they made a mistake, and it was this mistake that ruined all their chances of survival. That is, they don't know who their opponent is. They may think that they are really dealing with the police, the 88 Task Force, and the so-called SMP organization. But in reality, they were dealing with the core of a team that had crawled out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. They were the elite of the elite who were used to big scenes and would only be surprised for a second when they saw the mushroom cloud, and then quickly regained their fighting ideas. Yes, the explosion you made was spectacular, and the scale was actually quite good. But boy, we have blown up oil tankers, car bombs, IEDs. What are they compared to our rain of rockets? Empiricism is deadly. This sentence is the most appropriate to describe the JD elements at the scene. They thought that one explosion would completely destroy the police's will to resist, and after destroying part of the defense line, they would create opportunities for assault and rescue. Of course, in fact, the police's will to resist was indeed destroyed by half. But the question is, after all your calculations, could you have expected that among these people, there would be 4 crazy people who would treat the explosion as fireworks? Not at all. In the distance, the militants in 2 pickup trucks had been wiped out. The police paid a heavy price, but eventually they once again controlled the situation. Chen Chen's hearing gradually recovered. He heard intermittent gunshots, and then he shouted loudly. Number 1, throw stun grenades. Suppress the team at the refinery gate, and don't let them commit suicide. Clear. Li Bang's reply was also a little hoarse. While speaking, he quickly pulled out a stun grenade from his carrying gear, then raised his hand and threw it. The stun grenade landed accurately in the middle of the 7 people lying on the ground. Buzz, the sound of the explosion was like a firecracker compared to the previous car bomb, but sometimes, a firecracker can have a huge effect. The 7 people, whose internal organs were already churning due to the shockwave and who were hit by bullets, immediately fell into dizziness. Their limbs were no longer under their control, let alone standing up and struggling to run away. They didn't even have the strength to raise their guns to commit suicide. In this extremely short period of time, the four of them began to take turns to cover each other and advance forward, while Li Bang continuously threw stun grenades, just like the tactics in a fighting game, completely suppressing the opponents getting up. After 30 seconds, the three men arrived at the designated location. Chen Chen calmly raised his hand to signal them to stay and observe, and then he fired a stun grenade at close range, throwing it into the middle of the 7 people who had already lost consciousness. Number 1. Number 5, alert. Keep an eye out. The enemy may have reinforcements. Number 3. Cover me while I disarm the enemy. Clear. Everyone answered immediately, and Chen Chen walked between the 7 people. Under the cover of Sure Dekai, he threw all the weapons dropped by the JD members on the ground far away. He quickly checked around and found that, just as he had expected, these people did not carry any suicide detonation devices. That means that among these people, there must be an important figure at the big leader level. Otherwise, they would not have used such extreme methods to rescue them. But which one is it? Chen Chen quickly turned over the hands of the JD member on the ground, and at a glance, the difference was so obvious that he didn't even need to compare deliberately. The others had calloused hands and rough skin, but you were the only one with delicate skin and flesh that was one shade whiter than others. Moreover, your hair is all white, and the wrinkles on your face make you look like you were 70 years old, and you were the only one wearing a bulletproof vest pretending to be a bodyguard? It's him. I found the person. Retreat. We can't control it anymore. Take this man away first. Clear. Shidakai did not waste even a second. After Chen Chen confirmed the identity of the main target, he quickly pulled out his pistol and shot the other people on the ground one by one. His movements were so skillful that it seemed like he was cutting a watermelon in his own kitchen, and the heads of those JD elements on the ground really did explode like watermelons. It was a good thing for them to die in a coma. But there is no way. Time is running out. Go, retreat. Get in the car. The 4 of them retreated quickly, with the main target carried on Lin He's shoulders. While no one could react, the 4 of them quickly got into the car and threw the big shot into the back seat. Then, Lin He followed Chen Chen's order and drove the car to the side of the leader of the 88th Task Force who was organizing the redeployment and rescue. Chen Chen shouted to him, "Come with us, there's a big fish in the car, and we need a safe house." Clear. The team leader did not hesitate, but immediately opened the car door and got in. When he saw the man's face in the back seat, he could hardly suppress the shock on his face. Fuck. Bashir. Why is he here? He should be in jail. Chen Chen's expression instantly darkened. Bashir is the mastermind of the Bali bombings. He was arrested in 2010, just last year, and sentenced to 15 years in prison. It's only been a few months, and he's already been released. Are you sure this is Bashir? I caught it myself. The team leader also had a gloomy expression. After a moment, he said, "Son of bitch. There's no way Kandari is safe anymore. Sir, take me to your place, to your safe house." "We don't have a safe house. Our reinforcements are in La Boda." "Then go to La Boda." The leader answered without hesitation. At this moment, his faith seemed to collapse. But with the collapse of his faith, he seemed to have figured out a lot of things. After getting his answer, Chen Chen did not hesitate and immediately began to contact all his backup forces. The first person he contacted was Bao Qi. Without any extra words, he ordered the other party to go forward to provide support. At the same time, he also reminded Ping Xuan to bring medical equipment with him. The injured person was shot in the calf, the tibia was broken, and the artery was ruptured. Initial bleeding control has been carried out. At the same time, the injured may have organ damage caused by the explosion and may have internal bleeding. We are now heading towards La Boda along the ring road. The wounded are in a bad condition and can only hold out for an hour at most. Hurry. Advertisement. Who is the wounded? On the other end of the phone, Ping Xuan asked calmly. This is his principal. He must know who the injured person is in order to prepare a more effective rescue plan. He's not one of ours. He's our captive. He's about 70 years old. I don't have time to say more. I still have to contact other people. The situation is very bad, Bao Qi. Mobilize all our forces. This matter is very big. Very, very big. After saying that, Chen Chen hung up the phone immediately without waiting for a reply from the other end. Then he called the number of Argus he had just obtained. Without waiting for the other party to speak, he said hastily, "We caught Bashir. Bashir should have been in jail. Send support to us." "Who? Bashir?" Argus's tone on the other end of the phone did not sound fake. Chen Chen breathed a sigh of relief and continued, "That's Bashir. We are heading to Kolono in the south now. Give us support. Don't go." Argus's tone was a little excited. "Don't go. You caught Bashir in Kandari. Kolono is also Ganawan's territory. I need to confirm his attitude first. Give me 5 minutes. Clear." Argus's reaction put Chen Chen at ease. At least he was sure that Argus was not on Bashir's side. After hanging up the phone, he continued to call Xiaoyu. It took him quite some time to get through the overseas call, and while he was nervously waiting for a reply, the leader of Task Force 88, whose name he didn't even know, had already revealed his identity and helped the land cruiser pass the temporary roadblock set up by the police and drive out of the city of Kandari. Fortunately, the grassroots are not rotten yet. Lu Sun rushed all the way, and Xiaoyu's call was finally connected. Chen Chen immediately said, "It's a big deal. We fucking caught Bashir." "Bashir in Bali?" "That's right. Location plan. Just left Kandari. Ready to head to La Boda. Turn west to Karaka. I'll arrange for a pickup." "We can't go. Bashir is seriously injured. We need to meet up with Ping Xuan to rescue him." "Understood. We will carry out your plan. I will go and communicate with the Indonesian leaders." "Okay, that's it." Chen Chen hung up the phone. He was already dry-mouthed, but the tense situation did not ease at all. The support team of the Dongfeng Corps has set out, but the road is too long and too tortuous. If someone intercepts the car in the middle of the journey, we will have no power to resist at all. But fortunately, good news came soon. Agus responded that Ganawan was not aware of the matter and had already started communication, ordering all police forces along the way to stop moving and not to approach the ring road. This is a very, very smart move because no one can be sure whether there is a mole among the basic police officers. The fact that he could make this decision also proved his attitude. Of course, Chen Chen's statement that he was going to Kalono was just a smokescreen. If Ga Yaozi was up to something, he must have known that Bashir had been arrested. Shifting their surveillance focus to Kalono would be beneficial to their escape. And if Ga Yaozi is not guilty, he can seek asylum from him after reaching La Boda. Now it seems that the probability that he is not hiding anything is greater. At this time, 20 minutes had passed since the Land Cruiser left the city. During these 20 minutes, Lenny almost stepped on the accelerator into the gas tank. On the ring road, whose road conditions were not considered absolutely excellent, they were also speeding at a top speed of 120 kilometers. Chen Chen had to ask him to slow down a bit. If they got into a car accident, they would be really finished. Li Bang in the backseat had already completed the simple treatment of Bashir's wounds, and the leader of the task force also monitored the police's movements through his portable police radio. The police force around it was pinned down, and we were lucky that Ga Yaozi was clean. At least it looks clean now. His voice was a little low, but Chen Chen didn't have time to care about his emotions, because he had already seen that there was a car chasing after him from behind the Land Cruiser. I don't know who they are, but judging by their equally desperate speed, their purpose is absolutely clear. They wanted to stop the Land Cruiser, but couldn't get away. Chen Chen's heart sank. The farther he got from Kandari, the worse the road conditions became. It is only a matter of time before I get caught up. Maybe I should stop the car and take a chance with them. At this point, the reinforcement should be only 20 minutes away from us. If we can hold on for 20 minutes, we may still have a chance. But how can we last more than 20 minutes with only the equipment we have? Chen Chen's brain was about to explode. The car behind was getting closer and closer, and just when Chen Chen was about to make the decision to stop the car and fight, his phone finally rang. It's a small fish. Hold on for 2 minutes, reinforcements will be here soon. Chen Chen was greatly encouraged and immediately asked Lin he to continue speeding up. But at this moment, the people in the car behind could no longer hold back, leaned out of the sunroof, and started firing at the Land Cruiser. Bang, 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 bang. The bullet missed the target, and Chen Chen had no time to hope for luck, as an even stranger sound suddenly came to his ears. The sound of heavy machine guns. From the air, Chen Chen was startled. He raised his head and looked out the window. A helicopter had already flown overhead, pure black with a striking logo. Mobile Brigade. In a flash, the vehicle chasing behind was turned into scrap metal. Flames burst out, and Chen Chen let out a breath of foul air. He knew that he could finally rest in peace. Mobile Brigade, the real, strongest force of the Indonesian police. Their intervention means that CIU has directly contacted the Indonesian president. It's safe. Next to the ring road, near Moravi. The Land Cruiser had stopped, but the helicopter of the Air Mobile Brigade was still hovering. Bashir was pulled out of the car, and Ping Chuan was giving emergency treatment to his wounds. The treatment methods that were originally intended for their own people were ultimately used on the enemy first, but Chen Chen knew that it was well worth it. It is not only because of Bashir's intelligence value as a leader, but more importantly, it is the symbolic significance of his appearance in Kandari. Think about it, a leader who was just arrested for a large-scale terrorist attack several years ago reappeared in a major city in Sulawesi a few months later, and he was obviously related to a new round of terrorist attacks that just happened. What does this mean? There is no doubt that this means that there is a major problem with the entire Indonesian anti-terrorism system. It can even be said that the emergence of Bashir has raised things to a higher level than corruption. This is no longer just corruption, this is outright treason. No wonder CIU was so decisive in using the highest level of power. In fact, it should be said that this was not her dispatching power, but rather she was providing assistance to Indonesia. It is precisely for this reason that the Mobile Brigade appeared so decisively and struck so resolutely at the pursuers. Because they also knew that if the Land Cruiser of the Dongfeng Corps was really destroyed and Bashir was really kidnapped and killed, then all the efforts made by the previous generation would be wasted. Moreover, this entire country may fall into the abyss because of this and never be able to climb out again. Standing next to Ping Chuan, Chen Chen nervously watched him use skillful movements to stop bleeding, suture blood vessels, and suture wounds. Every pause of the other party would make Chen hold his breath. To be honest, such injuries are a bit too severe for an old man in his 70s. It would be normal if he couldn't survive. Fortunately, with the help of top-notch medical equipment and medicines, Ping Chuan quickly treated the wound. The bleeding had stopped. Ping Chuan wiped his hands with gauze and then said, "He's basically stable. The blood loss isn't too much, so no additional blood transfusion is needed. But he still needs observation, so it would be best if he were sent to Qingshan Park Hospital now. If he survives tonight, he will basically not die. How about we set off now?" Hearing Ping Chuan's words, Chen Chen shook his head and replied, "We can't leave now. We don't know where to go. This is too hot to handle. No matter where we send it, it will be wrong. Although Ga Yaozi has expressed his opinion, I don't dare to trust him completely. We can only wait here and wait for further communication from CIU. Things have developed to this point and are completely beyond our control. Next, we'd better do nothing and say nothing. If possible, I would even like to throw this person on the side of the road and let someone else pick him up." "That's serious?" Ping Chuan frowned and continued to ask, "Who exactly is this character? Is his influence that great?" Chen Chen sighed and replied, "His influence is not that great, but never mind. It's hard for me to explain. Let me tell you one possibility. That's right. Because of this person, there must have been a storm among the upper class in Indonesia. From now on, if there is any problem that is not handled well, both sides will fight openly. That is, we are likely to cause a coup. What's even more ridiculous is that someone just tried to intercept us on the road. I saw the shooter's face, and he was white. Then, the Mobile Brigade wiped out the enemy, without even a second thought. Do you know what this means? The people they killed were probably MPRI mercenaries, spokesmen for the Americans. It's an avalanche. The whole thing is like an avalanche. In contrast, if we had not investigated the batch of nail polish remover and had let the EIM people blow up a shopping mall, the impact might not have been that great. At this point, Chen Chen's brows were almost twisted into knots. He didn't know why he was so unlucky. Every mission he participated in was extremely challenging. It was okay in Pubei before, at least it was gradual. But this time, the first thing he came up with was a king bomb. The most ridiculous thing is that the enemy who is truly controlling all this has not even shown up yet, and we haven't even had any direct conflict with them. If the trend continues, and the Dongfeng Corps stays in Indonesia any longer, how out of control will things get? Advertisement, could it be possible that the aircraft carrier was blown up? Chen Chen sighed again, and at this moment his cell phone finally rang. It's a small fish. Solved. The first sentence from the other party cheered up Chen Chen, and he quickly asked, "What do you mean it was solved? So quickly. How can it be slow?" The president almost ordered the military to enter a state of emergency. Xiaoyu's tone was somewhat helpless. After a pause, he explained, "Someone has stepped forward to take the blame, sacrificing pawns to save the chariot. At least the problem of Bashir can be explained away. Go find Gunaganawan, right? Go find him. He will provide you with temporary shelter. As for Bashir, he will be handed over to the mobile brigade. They will take Bashir to Jakarta. Don't worry about what happens next." Good. Hearing this, Chen Chen breathed a sigh of relief. In fact, he really wanted to shoot Bashir right here or give him a thorough interrogation. After all, the attack by the other organization almost cost him his life. But at the same time, he knew that he absolutely couldn't do that. Because this person's existence is different from the drug dealers he had executed personally. His political significance is too strong, and I have no obsession with him. So why should I cause any trouble? He is a bargaining chip, and chips should be used as chips. Thinking of this, Chen Chen stopped asking questions and said, "We were probably attacked by MPRI just now. This matter is very sensitive." "That's enough." Xiaoyu interrupted Chen Chen and continued, "Someone will deal with them, so don't try to be brave for now. Give us some time. The development of the situation has exceeded our expectations. You didn't follow the route we designed at all. So, we need to adjust, and you need to adjust too. Don't think about seeking revenge on MPRI. It's not time for revenge yet. Don't worry. Now that the situation has changed, you have plenty of opportunities." Clear. Chen Chen did not argue with Xiaoyu anymore. He knew that Xiaoyu made this decision for his own good. After hanging up the phone, he nodded to Ping Chuan beside him, then walked to the middle of the blocked road, crossed his hands and raised them, signaling the helicopter to land. The pilots of the mobile brigade received his instructions and began to descend after confirming that the area was clear. At this time, Hirakawa had already directed others to bring Bashir over. After landing, the members of the mobile brigade jumped off the plane and stretched out their hands to shake hands with Chen Chen. Chen Chen pointed at Bashir standing aside, but at this moment, he saw a scene that shocked him. Bashir is awake. His facial muscles were tense, and he seemed to be biting something in his mouth. Chen Chen was shocked and rushed forward, but someone was faster than him. It was not Ping Chuan, but the leader of Task Force 88 who had been staring at Bashir. The two of them worked together to pry open Bashir's mouth. Ping Chuan also rushed over and said after a quick inspection, "Damn it, it's a good thing it's not a poison pill." He wanted to bite his tongue to commit suicide. What idiot still believes this these days? I really am amazed by the ideas of these JD members. Hearing his words, Chen Chen was speechless. But after hesitating for a moment, he said, "It's so far from here to Jakarta. There's no telling what he might do. He can't die. Come a few men and dismantle all his joints. The jaw is also removed." Chen Chen could not foresee how much impact Bashir's second capture would have on Indonesia, and when Xiaoyu confirmed that someone had taken the blame, he thought that this matter might just pass, and the next step would be a long, boring, and tedious negotiation phase. But he never expected that after seeing Bashir off, countless truly big things had happened during the one-hour journey from Moravi back to Laboda. In order to ensure that Chen Chen was aware of the situation, Xiaoyu transmitted real-time intelligence to Chen Chen every few minutes. And each of these pieces of information can be regarded as absolutely bombastic news. The person who stood up to take the blame was naturally going to die. He died by suicide, using a grenade that was shot in the head and blew to pieces. In addition to him, a large number of senior members of the 88th Task Force were controlled, two of whom tried to resist arrest and were shot dead on the spot. Helicopters of the mobile brigade were dispatched everywhere, and the entire city of Kendari was under martial law. However, the military, which was supposed to take on the functions of vigilance and maintaining public order at this time, was completely excluded. Instead, it was Ganawan who received the news first and ordered his men not to move first, who gained the trust of the people. With the authorization of the president, he began to dispatch the naval and air police teams near Kendari that had not rushed to Laboda for support and took on the responsibility of martial law. This is the Indonesian version of water police ashore. I wonder how many people will die in this storm. But this is just the beginning. It is not easy to clean cockroaches on the surface, and the eggs in deeper layers cannot be removed simply by slapping them with slippers. Perhaps, fire is needed to completely burn the soil that breeds the insect eggs. Not until the Dongfeng Corps returned to Laboda did Xiaoyu's intelligence sharing come to an end. Chen Chen got out of the car with a complicated expression. He had vaguely realized that things were developing in an uncontrollable direction. This was before Bashir came to the president's hands. The speed of the situation had reached this level. If the president or the president's core team really met Bashir, would it be possible to stop it? However, he didn't have a better solution for this. You can only leave the battlefield and hide aside, and then find a way to do your own thing after the fight between the gods is over. Thinking of this, he let out a long sigh, dispelling the chaotic thoughts in his mind, and then walked towards Zhang Yang, who was already at the entrance of Qingshan Park leading the team to greet him, and asked briefly and directly, "What's the situation here? Is the backup plan ready?" "I'm ready," Zhang Yang quickly replied. "Two small seaplanes are on standby 24 hours a day. If the most extreme situation really occurs, you can board and take off within 15 minutes. First, fly to a deserted island near Obi Island, refuel and resupply there, and then fly to the AU Islands. From the AU Islands, you can fly directly across the border to Papua New Guinea. Once there, Indonesia will basically have no way to deal with you. However, this is the last evacuation plan. If the situation permits, I still hope that you can stay in Indonesia, in Sulawesi. Nonsense. We don't want to leave either. Chen Chen shook his head helplessly and continued. But the problem is that none of us can predict how things will develop next. There are tens of thousands of people on both sides of the military and the civilian group. If just one person among them is irrational, then everything will be ruined. The mobile brigade has shown radical tendencies. The military can only pull back. Otherwise, there will be a big fight. Forget it, let's not talk about this for now. What do Argus and Ga Yaozi say? Hearing Chen Chen's question, Zhang Yang replied. Ga Yaozi has already rushed to Kandari, and the chief superintendent of Makassar is also on his way there. Agus will take over the investigation of La Bota time. The police are now in a mess. They have too much to do and too much pressure. The most troublesome thing is that they can't use the power of the 88th Task Force. Argus said he wanted to see you and had something to communicate with you. I guess it's about the follow-up safety and asylum. I suggest you go meet him first and put everything else aside. I can't let go. Chen Chen shook his head decisively and replied. The situation is so chaotic now, the JD elements in Sulawesi will definitely take action after hearing the news. If you say they won't take advantage of the situation and launch a surprise attack while the police are being transferred to Kandari, even a 3-year-old child won't believe it. We must strengthen the defense of the park, and the park must stop production and go on holiday. First, kick out all the local employees and let them go home. For at least a week, we must ensure the safety of the park, especially the safety of Chinese employees. Understood. I'll do it right away. Zhang Yang had no objection to Chen Chen's proposal, because he also knew that the current situation had become so tense that they had to activate the highest level of warning. What happened in Kandari was not just a simple terrorist attack. It was a complete subversive conspiracy. There must be people from the military involved, and they must be trying to achieve some unspeakable secret through this super large-scale attack. But now, their plan has failed, and they have even been caught in a weak spot. Then the Dongfeng Corps, which is at the center of the storm, will definitely be their primary target of retaliation, and the Qingshan Park, which has a close relationship with the Dongfeng Corps, will also become a target of retaliation. There is no other choice but to move forward and backward together. What else? Throw out the Dongfeng Corps and let them deal with it alone? Stop joking, we have all been in the same boat for a long time. If Qingshan Group abandons the Dongfeng Corps now, it would be equivalent to defecting in fact. Not to mention whether the Dongfeng Corps would have any grudges, the entire group would be on the rabbit's list. Therefore, executing Chen Chen's orders according to the highest standards and overcoming the difficulties together with them is the truly rational and wise choice. After a brief communication, Zhang Yang immediately began to arrange holidays and evacuation. But Chen Chen did not go to see Argus immediately because there was one more thing he had to deal with before meeting him. The leader of Task Force 88 who had followed them all the way to La Bota. Chen Chen now knows his name, Massimo. Originally, Chen Chen thought that he would leave with the mobile brigade or evacuate on his own after confirming that Bashir was gone. But unexpectedly, Massimo still insisted on coming to La Bota. According to him, he wanted to meet Ga Yaozi. Of course, he couldn't meet Ga Yaozi now, but Chen Chen still had to talk to him and find out his real purpose first. So, after returning to the Dongfeng Corps' office, Chen Chen called Massimo in and asked him straight to the point. What is your plan? Hearing Chen Chen's words, Massimo's expression darkened. After a few seconds of silence, he replied, that I originally wanted to meet Ga Yaozi and discuss matters concerning Bashir with him. But now it seems that this is no longer something I can interfere with. So to be honest, I don't know what I'm going to do. I just felt like I wanted to do something to avenge my brothers. But I really don't know how to do it. Chen Chen nodded slightly. He probably understood Massimo's current mood. A sudden attack took away several comrades who had fought side by side with him. He had probably already made up his mind to fight those JD elements to the death. But suddenly, with the appearance of Bashir, he discovered that his enemies were not just JD elements, but might even be his own people. Advertisement, this feeling is really hard to describe in words. The frustration of betrayal will push him into the abyss, and he will lose trust in everything around him. Ironically, the only one he could trust was the Dongfeng Corps, which had fought the JD elements to the end. This mercenary group didn't even belong to Indonesia, but came from a chaotic area that he once looked down upon. This is why he insisted on staying with the Dongfeng Corps. Perhaps only this strange team can give him a little bit of shallow sense of security and make him feel that there is still a ray of light in this world. Thinking of this, Chen Chen said, actually, I can't help you. But if you want to do something, I think you should return to Kandari as an individual to assist the police in organizing the treatment of the wounded. Well, it's nice to just be a volunteer or something. Impossible. We have been marked. As long as I return to Kandari, I will definitely be controlled. Massimo sighed and continued. Of course, this is a necessary measure. But if there's nothing I can do, I might as well stay in La Bota. There's no point in you staying here. Chen Chen answered decisively. I can help you. You need my identity, don't you? You must be crazy. Do you know the consequences of cooperating with us? Chen Chen asked helplessly. I know very well. Massimo nodded firmly and continued. Task Force 88 has a huge problem. Bashir was captured by us and is actually under our jurisdiction. But he escaped and even had the energy to organize a terrorist attack like that. This proves that the top echelons of this team have been completely corrupted by political infighting. I don't want to go to hell with them. I have to do something. Whether it works or not, I should at least try, right? Hearing this, Chen Chen frowned. Massimo's remarks are actually very representative. Perhaps it's not just him. There are many people in the entire Task Force 88 who hold such thoughts. After all, the struggle at the top has nothing to do with them. The benefits will not fall on them. But they're the ones who charge in a battle and die on the battlefield. They're just tools. Even this time, those who are called heroes in the anti-terrorism operation are just tools. Who would be willing to accept such a fate? So although it sounds a bit utilitarian, his words are absolutely from the heart. Maybe he could actually work with him, but not in the way he had envisioned. Chen Chen thought for a few seconds, then said, "You are right. We can also cooperate. However, our cooperation must not be exposed in public, as that would put both of us in a very passive position. There is only one kind of truly meaningful cooperation: intelligence. Right now, the intelligence systems of the police and the 88th Task Force are completely separated. You have never conducted any intelligence cooperation, which has greatly reduced the efficiency of combating JD elements. Well, if you really want to do something, you can start from this aspect. How about it? Do you want to consider it?" "No problem," Massimo answered without even a moment's hesitation, and then he immediately asked, "Do you want us to work with the police, or directly with you?" "That of course it's the police. Do you think we're qualified to cooperate with you? Leaking confidential information to us is also treason, right? You don't even know our true purpose." "Sorry, I thought it was too simple." Massimo smiled awkwardly, and he also realized how absurd his question just now was. However, the fact that he could ask such a question shows how serious the crisis of trust within Task Force 88 has become. After confirming the willingness and direction of cooperation, Chen Chen talked to Massimo about the details of the cooperation. Although intelligence cooperation is easy to say, it is difficult to actually promote it. On the one hand, Massimo's authority was insufficient, making it difficult for him to obtain sufficient and valuable intelligence. On the one hand, the relationship between the police and Task Force 88 is more tense than ever before, and it is not easy to establish a relationship of mutual trust between the two sides. In particular, this is not an official cooperation recognized by the government. Instead, it is more like an internal espionage activity like Infernal Affairs. Its sensitivity and danger are self-evident. Therefore, Chen Chen did not plan to communicate too much with Massimo. Everything can be pushed onto the police, who can actually make the decision. Everything we just talked about does not exist. You have not talked to me about it, and you don't know anything about cooperation. Do you understand? Clear. Massimo nodded in understanding and added, "Whether in front of Argus, Ga Yaozi, or my superiors, I always say the same thing. You don't have to worry about me betraying you. Without a substantive transaction, no one can embarrass you at this time. Besides, once the truth is exposed, I will be in greater danger than you." Hearing his words, Chen Chen nodded in relief and said, "It seems that you really want to do something." A bitter smile appeared on Massimo's face, and then he replied, "Bashir killed many people, including my friends and colleagues. It is a mistake that he is still alive today. I can accept such a mistake, but I cannot accept that such a mistake will lead to a bigger mistake. You may not understand this, but here's what I'm saying. Someone has to right this wrong." Massimo is an idealist, an extremely rare and special idealist in this country. Chen Chen couldn't fully understand his motives at first, but when he thought about it carefully, he realized that his hatred towards the IM and certain organizations was the same as his. If you put yourself in his shoes, you will probably do the same thing if you were in his position. I should say that you will do it more thoroughly than him. Therefore, based on this understanding, Chen Chen temporarily put Massimo on the list of controlled use, and after finishing the conversation with him, he took him to find Agus and introduced him to this man who was destined to be promoted and make a fortune, and destined to have a place in the Sulawesi police force. When the two met, the expressions on their faces were extremely complicated. They are both just small characters now, but everyone can see that if the two of them can really work closely together, they may reach heights that others cannot reach in a very short time in the future. Chen Chen did not listen to their conversation. Just as he said, this was the bottom line that he would never touch. Of course, this does not mean that Chen Chen stayed out of the matter completely. On the contrary, after Argus and Massimo finished communicating, he immediately found Massimo again and proposed to continue cooperation. This was part of Argus's plan, and following a similar process to the SMP, the Eastern Corps finally obtained official authorization from the police. As an outsourced team, they have been granted law enforcement powers almost equivalent to those of the police. In future operations, as long as there are formal police officers in the Dongfang Corps, they can make any decisions that should be made based on circumstances. As for where this official police officer comes from, that is not a question at all. Chen Chen can choose for himself, pick someone he thinks is suitable, and put him in the team, and treat him as a mascot or amulet. You can arrange fixed candidates in your team. Of course, you can also make temporary selections before each mission. It all depends on you. However, I must reiterate that all your actions are supervised by the presence of official police officers. And if you act on your own without the presence of a formal police officer, you will bear all the consequences. Argus rarely uttered a long string of formal and standard English sentences. After listening to it, Chen Chen couldn't help but want to curse him as an old fox. The intention of his words was actually very clear, which was to tell Chen Chen that some tasks could be carried out according to the standards of formal operations, but those things that were inconvenient for the police to participate in and that the Dongfang Corps had to do would have to be taken by the Dongfang Corps itself. They completely shirked their responsibilities but didn't want to take any credit. This was the Indonesian police. But it didn't matter, since I didn't expect to get any benefits from them anyway. Cooperation with them is just part of some huge plan. Once the plan is implemented, the benefits that he as a participant can obtain are immeasurable. After walking out of Argus's ward, Chen Chen felt much more relaxed. On the one hand, it is because the safety of the Dongfang Corps has been basically guaranteed. Argus promised to allocate a portion of police force to provide key protection for Qingshan Industrial Park, with the number of police officers being at least over 100. With this group of people acting as cannon fodder, the pressure on the Dongfang Corps was naturally greatly reduced. On the other hand, it is because the situation has opened up. Prior to this, since arriving in Indonesia, the Dongfang Corps had been in an extremely disadvantaged and passive situation. There were wolves surrounding them from all directions, and it seemed as if any passing dog would pounce on them and bite them, but they had neither the means nor the right to fight back. Now that the issue of law enforcement power has been resolved, the Dongfang Corps has finally gone from being passive to being active. Not to mention, with the help of Massimo, the accidentally acquired traitor, the Dongfang Corps successfully reached into the interior of the 88th Task Force. In this regard, they even did better than Xiaoyu. After that, the movements of the 88th Task Force were no longer a completely black box. even if there was no way to get the most accurate and reliable intelligence from the upper level. Chen Chen could use the clues that infiltrated the lower level and combine it with the macro intelligence from Xiaoyu to guess the enemy's general movements. Just like now, what kind of deal Bashir had with the top brass of Task Force 88 and the military was still an unsolved mystery to Chen Chen. But at the same time, with the appearance of Bashir and the news confirmed by Xiaoyu that MPRI has entered the game, Chen Chen could easily guess that the US must be trying to carry out a subversive action that they had done countless times in other places. But unfortunately, this operation was strangled in the cradle by the Dongfeng Corps before it could even be launched. Well, based on the premise that their direction of action is unlikely to change significantly, the other party must continue with its usual strategy and find ways to continue to deepen their roots in the field of JD molecules. Bashir is gone, but the JD elements in Sulawesi and Indonesia are still alive. Will be pushed out next. Perhaps it is time to ask Xiaoyu for the list again. Back in his office, Chen Chen called Xiaoyu and explained his intentions to her. But Xiaoyu's answer surprised Chen a little. For the next 1 or 2 weeks, you must stay in Qingshan Park. Don't go anywhere, and don't organize any external activities. It's the eve of a political storm in Indonesia, and you can't help but realize how serious the situation is. We don't have time to care about you. Most of our energy should be spent on mediation at a higher level. So, don't ask me for a name. I can't give it to you. Don't worry, MPRI won't take action at this time. They will give you exactly the same situation. Just treat this as a halftime break. Get your equipment ready and train your dog. If you really have nothing else to do, learn how to fly a helicopter or a seaplane. Maybe it'll be useful in the future. But I always feel like you were hinting at something. Chen Chen scratched his head subconsciously and replied, no hint. The seaplanes currently assigned to Qingshan Group still rely on commercial pilots, not our own people at all. It will take some time for our people to get there. Can't you try to learn during this time? You can learn everything. You can learn everything. That's it. Just stay here quietly. If something happens again during this period, you may never be able to leave Pubei in your lifetime. There was a hint of advice in Xiaoyu's tone, and Chen Chen had no way of arguing with him. After all, Indonesia was not Pubei, and the 88th Task Force was not a warlord. When the bullets cannot make any sound, it is time for politicians to use their own methods. So, after hanging up the phone, Chen Chen made a decisive decision. No matter how violent the storm outside was, for the next week or two, I was determined to stay at home and not go anywhere. After a series of issues were resolved, all the workers were given holidays and dismissed, and the entire Qingshan Park became empty. The bustling scene was no longer there, and for a moment, even Chen Chen felt a little uncomfortable. It is well known that empty industrial facilities can cause sadness in humans, as they often mean some degree of disaster, decline, or an uncertain future. This is a new instinct acquired by humans after the Industrial Revolution. No matter who you are, as long as you grow up in a socialized environment, it is impossible to escape the influence of this instinct. Therefore, the atmosphere inside the entire Qingshan Park is somewhat solemn and even depressing. Advertisement, but fortunately, the arrival of a group of new members quickly diluted this depression. 12 military dogs arrived, and with them came a professional dog trainer. The plane landed at La Boda Airport, and Chen Chen personally led a team to welcome them with the highest security standards. Looking at their equipment, the dog trainer was even a little scared. He was silent all the way and didn't even say the most basic greeting. It was not until he reached the interior of the park and saw more familiar East Asian faces that he finally spoke and said something to Chen Chen that made him laugh and cry. He said, with all the fanfare you guys gave me, I thought I would be sent straight to the battlefield when I landed. I thought you guys would give me a gun. Chen Chen laughed in silence and quickly shook his head to explain. The situation has been a bit complicated recently. It's not safe outside the park, so the scene is indeed a bit big. However, the next week or two will probably be relatively calm. You should seize this time and try to adapt first. No problem. The dog trainer nodded immediately and introduced himself. My name is Lin Chenming. I'm from Northeast China, and I used to be a border guard in Heilongjiang. Stop. There's no need to say this. Chen Chen quickly stopped him, and the latter quickly shut up and nodded. I know. I almost let it slip. Let's not talk about this, old boss. Let's take a look at the dog first. Look at the dog. Chen Chen answered helplessly. Lin Chenming smiled and took Chen Chen to the front of the car. They opened the aviation boxes one by one. The military dogs that were originally a little listless jumped out immediately and became full of energy. They are all German Shepherds, which is considered a very standard breed among military dogs. Judging from their condition, all of these military dogs are in their prime and are definitely not the kind of elderly dogs that are privately adopted after retirement. So you really didn't fool around at all. Chen Chen was moved and couldn't help but say, they're all good dogs. This is really a big loss. Of course not. These dogs have just been trained. They are in their best spirits. Look, they took both a plane and a boat, and their conditions are the same sit. At the command, all the military dogs sat in place. It can be said that their obedience has been trained to the extreme. Are you afraid of guns? Chen Chen continued to ask. Don't worry, I passed all the desensitization training. Explosions and gunshots are basically no problem. But to be honest, there is still a problem with these dogs. They have never experienced actual combat, so they're still a little less ferocious. Hearing his words, Chen Chen couldn't help but laugh. You're just dreaming. We're the dogs that have survived actual combat and are ready to take our turn? Stop kidding. It's always right to think about it. Lin Qinyang scratched his head embarrassedly and issued a few instructions to gather all the military dogs together. At this time, Wang Qi, who was assigned by Zhang Yang to be responsible for the military dog support work, had also arrived with his team. Needless to say, he naturally praised them again. There may be many people who have served in the military who inherently don't like dogs, but there are probably almost no people who don't like military dogs. After all, in their view, military dogs have gone beyond the category of dogs and entered the ranks of comrades in arms. This is why Chen Chen and Lin Qinyang always say dog when talking about military dogs. Instead of the colloquial dog, good dog is an exception because this sentence is said to the dog and is part of the password. Everyone has seen the new military dogs. Wang Qi took everyone and the dogs to see the newly cleaned kennel. After all, the conditions here are still simple, and there is no way to build a standardized kennel. So Wang Qi simply vacated 2 rooms in the staff dormitory, and after a simple partition, used them as temporary kennels. Lin Chenyang was quite satisfied with the environment of the kennel, but he also put forward some suggestions for improvement. In addition to the environment, Lin Chenyang also has requirements for personnel arrangements. According to him, the environment in Indonesia is hot, and the new dogs have not yet adapted to the environment. The kennels have to be cleaned at least twice a day, and the air conditioner cannot be turned on. They can only cool down by spraying water, which is too much for one person to do. In addition to this, providing them with food is also a problem. Military dogs need to eat boiled eggs, and he needs to find a helper just to peel the eggshells. Wang Qi wrote down these opinions one by one and prepared to report them to Zhang Yang for implementation. After everything was arranged and the first meal was fed, everyone finally left the kennel and went back to rest. Looking at the military dogs lying on the ground to rest after eating, Bao Qi, who was always curious about new things, couldn't help but sigh. This is the first time I've seen a live military dog. I played with drones, but I've still got military dogs. Who would believe this if I told anyone? Hearing his words, Li Bang on the side couldn't help but feel a little confused. Doesn't the 7th Brigade also have military dogs? Don't make a fuss, that's also called a military dog? Bao Qi pursed his lips in disdain and continued. Look at the mental state of these dogs, and then think about those in the 7th Brigade. What a huge difference. The dogs of the 7th Brigade are at best slightly obedient guard dogs. These are the real military dogs. I feel that the difference between these dogs and the dogs of the 7th Brigade is even greater than the difference between our Dongfeng Corps and the 7th Brigade. That's true. Chen Chen nodded slightly and explained. The differences between dogs are always greater than the differences between people. But how big is it? You will know when we start the formal training tomorrow. Without waiting until the next day, Lin Chenyang started the first round of patrols of the park with a military dog that evening. In fact, it is not difficult to learn to use military dogs because they are very intelligent animals, especially after long-term training. Only a few simple commands are needed to make them complete all tasks accurately. Therefore, all 12 members of the Dongfeng Corps, including 10 members of the security department, learned how to cooperate with military dogs in a very short period of time. The first round of experimental patrols began at 6 p.m., and the sentries on duty completed their tasks almost easily. Everyone praised these dogs highly. Whether in vigilance, obedience, or stability, they have reached a very high level. They are not only excellent military dogs, but also the best among excellent military dogs. When he came back, Bao Qi had even become friends with the dog assigned to him, and they were almost on good terms. Looking at Chen Chen, who came to take over, Bao Qi said excitedly, Brother Chen, this dog is so smart. It goes wherever I tell it to go, and sits wherever I tell it to sit. It is also very alert. It started barking when it encountered an employee who was out for a walk before I even noticed it. Really? Let's bring dogs with us on missions from now on. They're so useful. As he spoke, Bao Qi stroked the head of the military dog named Neza in his hand. The latter was obviously a little impatient, but still gritted his teeth and let him pull it. Seeing this, Chen Chen said with a smile, Don't keep touching its head. Generally speaking, military dogs are very resistant to intimate actions from unfamiliar people. Look at it. It's obviously fed up with you, yet you're still touching it. Hearing Chen Chen's words, Bao Qi chuckled and replied, I know, I did it on purpose. This is called desensitization training. If you are not familiar with it, then you are not familiar with it. You will get familiar with it in the future. By the way, Brother Chen, when will their equipment arrive? Can they wear the bulletproof vests? Is it heavy? Is it bulletproof? The bulletproof vest that dogs wear are generally not level 4 bulletproof vests. Level 3 is the best. Too heavy a bulletproof vest would hinder their movements and mean they lose their most important functionality. But I've told Xiaoyu that if the fiber material is the same, it should be as thick as possible. Theoretically, it should be able to protect against some common rifle bullets. But Chen Chen did not continue speaking because he knew that what he was about to say was too cruel. These military dogs are essentially consumables. Otherwise, why did Xiaoyu send 12 dogs? Compared with the 12-man configuration of the Dongfeng Corps, this number is obviously over-equipped. Generally speaking, a team of 4 with 1 dog is already considered too many. Her meaning was very clear, which was to ensure that Chen Chen could get a timely replacement after the military dog was killed. There's nothing we can do. Reality is just so cruel. In high-intensity counterterrorism operations, the death rate of military dogs can reach over 70%. Even among the most elite and skilled teams in the United States, the casualty rate of military dogs can only be reduced to about 25%. That is to say, on average, 1 dog will be sacrificed for every 4 missions. How long will 12 dogs last the Dongfeng Corps? If possible, Chen Chen hoped that no dogs would be sacrificed in the future. But if he had no other choice, he would never hesitate. People can die, let alone dogs? Watching Bao Qi constantly stimulating Neza with intimate actions, Chen Chen couldn't help but sigh. Then, he took Neza's leash and said to Bao Qi, Go back and rest. This shift is my turn. Okay. Bao Qi left reluctantly. Chen Chen shook his head and walked out the door with Neza. This time, he did not patrol according to the planned route around the factory area, but instead planned to take Neza for a walk around the empty factory buildings and mines. His original intention was to let Neza adapt to the factory environment and the surrounding smells to avoid a stress reaction after starting work later. However, what he did not expect was that Neza showed obvious alertness as soon as he entered the first factory. Its nose twitched constantly, and its state became excited. Chen Chen frowned slightly and gave a tentative order. Neza, be quiet. Sit down. Neza sat down immediately, but his nose was still constantly sniffing something in the air. This behavior shows that he was not distracted by the interest factor, but smelled the familiar scent of the target object. No way, are you a bomb-sniffing dog? Advertisement Chen Chen did not ask in detail about the training subjects of this batch of military dogs, because military dogs and police dogs are different. What he cared about was actually the core skills of military dogs such as reconnaissance, vigilance, guarding, biting, and grasping. But it seems that these dogs have undergone special training. Chen Chen loosened the traction rope and gave a loud order. Neza, search. As soon as he finished speaking, Neza rushed out like an arrow. Chen Chen stood there waiting. Just over 10 seconds later, Neza's rapid barking was heard from the corner of the factory. Woof woof. The bark is low and slightly hoarse, which is an obvious threat warning sound, which is significantly different from the general high-pitched barking to warn enemies. Chen Chen's heart suddenly skipped a beat. What's going on? Are there really explosives in the factory? Explosives for blasting? No. How could that thing be placed in a factory? It is usually kept in a special warehouse for explosives, and there is a fixed number of access points. There is no possibility of it being stolen. Chen Chen raised the gun in his hand and moved step by step towards the direction of the shouting. At this time, Neza was crawling not far from a pile of debris, continuously issuing warning sounds at the pile. Chen Chen did not act rashly, but ordered, Neza, come. Damn. Hearing the command, Neza quickly returned to Chen Chen, and Chen Chen took out his cell phone and called Lin Chenming over. Lin Chenming arrived at the scene quickly. He confirmed that Neza had received bomb detection training, and he also basically confirmed that there was a high probability that there were explosives in the pile of debris. This time, Chen Chen really began to feel uncomfortable. It's not right to tear it down, and it's not right not to tear it down. After thinking for a long time, Chen Chen finally decided to use a remote-controlled unmanned vehicle to explore the way. Although this thing does not have a grabbing function, it can still be used to see clearly from a close distance. After some investigation, with the guidance of Neza, Chen Chen finally saw the target hidden in a pile of debris. A PE plastic water tank that is very common in a factory is covered with a layer of tarpaulin, and inside the tarpaulin are several iron cans that are covered very hastily. There were wires wrapped around the tin, and it was obvious that it was an explosive. But it seems that this thing has not been activated. Chen Chen used a remote control car to pull the hook to hook the water tank, and pulled it little by little to the open space outside the factory. After the personnel evacuated to a distance and observed that there was no danger, Chen Chen directly called the police. What? Dismantle it yourself? Don't be ridiculous. The Dongfeng Corps doesn't have explosion-proof suits. A full 2 hours later, Argus dispatched a bomb disposal team from nearby Losoni, removed the fuse of the explosive, and eliminated the danger. The bomb disposal team's work style was crude. After confirming that there was no risk of detonation, they actually unscrewed the lid of the tin can and checked the explosives inside. It was most likely black powder. Lin Chenming, who was standing next to Chen Chen and watching, spoke. Why? Black powder is not very popular here. It's either ANFO or TATP. Neza can't smell TATP. It smells like fruit. ANFO smells too strong of gasoline. It's hard to smell it. It can't be TNT, right? I've never heard of TNT being used in a terrorist attack. Yes. Chen Chen answered casually, and at this time, the bomb disposal team's answer had already come out. It is indeed black powder. Chen Chen touched Neza's head and praised him, saying good dog. But even though the explosives were removed, he was still not relieved. This was clearly an attack that had not yet been launched. But the local employees have been driven away. Who put this thing there? Homemade explosives were found in the factory area, which was actually a very obvious signal. Because this means that the local extremist armed forces conspiracy against the Qingshan Park has actually been going on for a long time, and it was not until the arrival of the Dongfeng Corps that they launched a large-scale attack on the Qingshan Park. On the other hand, using black powder to make explosives is also different from the styles of JIS and EAM that Chen Chen was familiar with before. After all, these two organizations have complex personnel and relatively high technical capabilities. Theoretically, it is impossible for them to use black powder anyway. Even if we don't use TATP like what we found this time, it is still very easy to make some ammonium nitrate-like explosives. If worst comes to worst, how about just using Molotov cocktails or thermite? Isn't this much more lethal than black powder? There is actually a misconception here that is many people think that if you pour out the black powder in fireworks and firecrackers and mix them together, as long as the amount is large enough, it can cause an explosion with sufficient power. After all, there are news reports of explosions in fireworks factories every now and then in this world. Judging from previous reports, the power of the explosions is still quite considerable. But in reality, this thing is really not that useful. If the equivalent is not enough, it is at best a big firecracker. The range of the overpressure zone is very small. If it is not delivered close to the face, it is hard to say how much damage it can cause other than a severe hit to the ear. There are generally only 3 ways to increase the power of black powder: purification, compression, and granulation. The difficulty of these 3 technologies is actually not low. Although they look simple, if you really want to do this, you might as well spend some time going back to your own kitchen to make TATP. The black powder found in the factory this time is the most primitive crude black powder. Altogether, it weighs less than 5 kilograms, which is equivalent to about 1 kilogram of TNT. What does it mean when 1 kilogram of TNT explodes? Let me put it this way. If it is thrown into your living room, and you happen to be reading in the study next door, then after the explosion, you may feel chest tightness and accelerated heartbeat due to the violent shock wave. The weak may die suddenly, and the unlucky may be injured by the flying building materials. But even if there is only a wall between you, there is basically no possibility of being fatal. As for wanting to blow the house down, even if it was an ordinary brick and wood structure, there would not be too serious structural damage, not to mention the steel concrete structure that is commonly used nowadays. Therefore, it is really uncommon to use this thing to launch an attack. And it is even more strange that a detonation device, which is not sophisticated but not crude, was specially made for a large grenade. Chen Chen frowned as he watched the actions of the bomb disposal team in the distance. After confirming that it was safe, he stepped forward to show his identity, presented the certificate that Argus had temporarily processed for him, and completed the handover with the bomb disposal team. So, the evidence that should have been taken back to the police station fell into Chen Chen's hands. In order to protect the evidence, he did not grab it rashly, but stood aside and carefully used the branches he picked up to poke the explosives that were scattered on the ground. Bao Qi and Shi Dakai were squatting beside him. After a quick glance, Bao Qi said, it's a standard IED design, detonated by a radio short circuit. It looks like he's learned something, but not much. This thing doesn't even have a detonator design for it. With so much black powder, the detonation speed is not high to begin with, and the powder is not granulated. If it really explodes, it won't be just a large firework, right? It's strange that he could make a detonator, even though his skills are crude. But you say he knows what he's doing, but the things he made aren't very useful. It looks like an amateur player. It's unlikely that this was done by professional technicians organized by JD. Hearing his words, Chen Chen nodded slightly, and then replied, that's what I thought. I suspect that it might be a peripheral member who wanted to do something on his own and was trying to figure it out according to the teaching materials issued by the organization. He had no basic knowledge of chemistry and could not make complex explosives, so he chose black powder. 1 sulfur, 2 nitrates, and 3 charcoals. The mix is relatively simple, but it's possible that he overestimated the power of black powder. It's possible. Sure, Dukai also nodded, and after thinking for a moment, he said, in this way, we can eliminate a large number of suspects. First of all, among the Chinese employees, those skilled workers and those with high education can basically be ruled out. If they were to do it, they would most likely not choose such a basic explosive. As for the ordinary Chinese workers, it is hard for me to imagine what motivation they have to do this kind of thing. In other words, suspicion still falls on local employees. But the local employees have been cleared out today. Bao Qi said doubtfully. Hearing his words, Chen Chen said, maybe it wasn't put in today. We need to find Zhang Yang to confirm the specific situation. The security department patrols and inspects the factory every day. Maybe they will have new clues. After saying that, he stood up and walked toward Zhang Yang, who was waiting not far away. After a brief communication, all the members of the security department, including the BC personnel involved in the safety inspection, gathered together and reported the situations they understood in turn. Combining the information they had, Chen Chen found that he was indeed right. There have been so many special situations inside and outside the park in recent days that there has been a certain degree of chaos in internal management. In fact, this factory has not been properly inspected for several days. This means that the maker of the explosives might have put the stuff into the factory as early as 2 days ago. At that time, Laboda was in chaos. Was this part of the original riot plan? But because the Dongfeng Corps responded quickly and swiftly to quell the disturbance, the explosion originally scheduled inside the park did not occur? It's very likely. But if that's the case, then it will be very difficult to find the murderer. It looks like your vacation will have to be extended further. Chen Chen said with a slightly teasing tone. Hearing his words, Zhang Yang nodded helplessly. We can't help it. If the explosives have entered the park, it means that we are not clean inside either. No one dares to continue using this person when he is so unclean. I'm afraid we have to re-examine all local employees or recruit a group of new people. Hearing this, Chen Chen's eyes lit up, but he suddenly remembered that he had discussed this topic with Zhang Yang. Local employees are not easy to use, and Chinese employees are too expensive, so why not recruit a group of low-cost and easy-to-use people? The work in the mine actually does not require much technical skills, but requires a high level of hard-working qualities. In that case, aren't the civilians in Pubei the best choice? The only problem is a passport. However, given the close relationship between the Bao family and the Bagan officials, there should be no problem in temporarily issuing a batch of passports with legitimate reasons, right? It actually only took us 3 days to apply for passports. After all, the more unruly a place is, the more you can break the rules. Thinking of this, Chen Chen coughed and said, how about I bring another group of people over for you? You'll change it for me? From where? Zhang Yang asked subconsciously, but he quickly reacted. Bagan, Boss Chen, can you do this? A look of surprise flashed across his face. In fact, in his perception, Chen Chen had always been an image of a tough soldier, just like those serious soldiers he had come into contact with before, good at fighting but much weaker in other aspects. Advertisements such people are generally not good at socializing or business. But now, Chen Chen actually said that he wanted to send him a new group of people? Doesn't this mean that what he did in Pubei was far from as simple as he thought? Looking at his expression, Chen Chen smiled and replied, if you want it, I can get it. You pay for the travel expenses. I can't say how much you want, but it shouldn't be a problem to get 100 or 200 for the first batch. With so many people, the production work in Qingshan Park can basically be guaranteed. The people of Pubei have another advantage, which is that they are closer to us in terms of cultural identity, so the difficulty of management will be much lower. No problem. Zhang Yang nodded decisively, and then said, the management of local employees is a matter for our subsidiary to decide on its own. I can make the final decision on this aspect. The situation in Indonesia is too complicated right now. There are too many bad people among the people. It would be better to just isolate them completely. Come on, do it. Having said that, Chen Chen did not seem too anxious. He said, but you have to think about it. If it's the Pubei people, Indonesia's employment problem won't be solved. How are you going to compensate the local government of Sulawesi? It is more cost-effective to give money to the local government than to these disobedient and inefficient workers. You don't have to worry about this problem. Zhang Yang smiled slightly and replied, many times, the so-called increase in employment rate is just a number on paper. We have all kinds of ways to influence this number, but no one really cares whether it's true or not. What they care about is how much benefit they can get from these numbers. Understood. It's settled then. I'll make the contact, and we'll discuss the specific cost. After saying goodbye to Zhang Yang, Chen Chen returned to his office. He had previously thought about taking advantage of this opportunity to tie the interests of the Dongfeng Corps, or to be more precise, the Dongfeng Group, to the Qingshan Park, and by the way, look for opportunities to expand the influence of the Dongfeng Group beyond Pubei, but he did not expect that this opportunity would come so soon. Transporting human resources. This is essentially the work of a human resources company, or, to put it bluntly, it is selling people. However, there is a difference between selling heads and selling heads. I don't just want to make a profit by using people. What's more important is to open up this channel. Just imagine what will happen if the personnel exchanges between Pubay and Indonesia become normalized in the future. The closed pattern of the entire Pubay will be completely broken. With the trend of the Maritime Silk Road, Dongfeng Group, and even the entire Pubay can achieve unprecedented development. The basic situation has been further consolidated, and if he wants to go further, he will have a more powerful trump card. Chen Chen did not hesitate. He immediately called Bao Xiaomei and Peng Shuqing respectively and explained his plan to them. Needless to say, Peng Shuqing would never refuse any business that could make money. As for Bao Xiaomei, even if it was just the fact that she could connect with a formal company from the north through this business, it was enough to make her interested. So, the plan was smoothly drawn up, and the two of them took on their respective responsibilities and immediately began to prepare. Just half an hour later, Peng Shuqing called back to tell Chen Chen that he had found a suitable candidate. That I have discussed this with He Bongxiong, and he plans to work with He Bupa to reduce the size of the coalition forces. This is a condition of the deal with Myanmar and a means for him to cut non-essential spending. The first batch of disarmament will probably involve about 400 people, and we can pick any of them. Chen Chen was stunned when he heard what Peng Shuqing said. Damn, I just asked you to find me some workers in the mines, but you got me a bunch of militia? Of course, in Pubay, the distinction between the two is not so clear. But after all, these are hundreds of militiamen who have received basic military training, have basic combat capabilities, and can fight as soon as they pick up guns. It seems that this is indeed the best choice. After all, Qingshan Industrial Park needs a certain degree of self-protection ability. It is impossible for it to rely solely on the security department and Dongfeng Group to provide them with all-round protection without blind spots. If they could choose, who wouldn't want to have an organized team? At least with this group of people, if they encounter a mass riot like last time, Qingshan Park will have several more response plans. Perfect. Chen Chen showed a satisfied smile on his face, and then he answered, no problem. You could do a preliminary screening first to screen out those unclean and dishonest personnel. Then, contact Bao Xiaomei and have their passports processed and sent over as soon as possible. By the way, where's the person I need? When will he be here? What does old pig say? Hearing his words, Peng Shuqing immediately replied, it's already been done. We'll take off the day after tomorrow at the latest, first to Jakarta and then to Sulawesi. One more thing, our tanks have been shipped and are expected to arrive in Tachalike within 2 weeks. In addition, the armored vehicles from Thailand will be delivered soon, and our armored force will be established soon. In terms of manpower, should we ask Lao Zhu to speed up? Speed up, speed up, Chen Chen answered without hesitation. Tell him to recruit people as soon as possible and train them as soon as possible. Things on my end are progressing faster than expected. We will have preliminary results in a week or two. When the time comes, I will solve the problem in Indonesia as quickly as possible and then return to Pubay. When I go back, I want to see a fully formed armored company. You don't have much time left. The next time I go back to Pubay, it will be the time to completely solve Pubay's problems. Clear. Peng Shuqing nodded decisively. Afterwards, the call was hung up and Chen Chen breathed a sigh of relief. This time, Indonesia and Pubay finally linked up. Once the Bashir issue is resolved, he will immediately take action, further consolidate the established connections and subsequent actions, and find ways to open up Indonesia's upper-level connections. By then, Dongfeng Group will be able to gain a vast market here. And if you want armored equipment, you don't have to buy it secretly from Africa. Indonesia is about to start a large-scale equipment replacement in 2011. These obsolete but still usable items should also find a place to put their residual heat to use. Chen Chen remembered that in just a few years, they eliminated nearly 200 AMX-13s that were still basically usable. I wonder what a spectacular sight it would be if these tanks were pulled to Pubay. Or to be more radical, what if we could get 1 or 2 Leopard 2s? By then, what about Winbang? What about MPRI? What about CIA? What about Kachin? You want to fight me? After finalizing the follow-up plan, Chen Chen temporarily put these business issues aside and began to focus on the relatively more urgent small crisis at hand. The first thing he had to do was to find a way to ensure the safety of the park and confirm whether there were any more undiscovered explosives in the park. At this time, Neza, who had received bomb search training, played a huge role. After spending 2 hours, Neza basically patrolled the entire park and indeed found new explosives. However, what was found this time were only semi-finished products, the black powder was scattered, and the remote control detonator had not been fully installed. According to routine procedures, Chen Chen called the police, and after a simple bomb disposal to confirm that there was no risk, he took the evidence into his own hands. At around 12 o'clock in the evening, all the evidence was placed on Chen Chen's desk, of course, excluding the gunpowder itself. Otherwise, several kilograms of black gunpowder placed on the desk would have been a bit creepy. Chen Chen was wearing gloves as he looked through the iron cans used to hold explosives. The light outdoors was not good before, and the information he could see was limited, but now that he was in the office, he discovered some unusual details. The tin can was made of very ordinary rolled iron leather, but there were hand-carved or ground grooves on it. The manufacturer obviously wanted to make the explosion produce as many fragments as possible to achieve the effect of killing people. From this point of view alone, it can be seen that this bomber definitely did not act on impulse. On the contrary, the work of carving grooves is very boring and difficult, even more difficult than making black powder itself. This also shows that he was determined to succeed in this explosion. In addition, there are very obvious welding marks on the seal of the tank. Although it has been polished, due to the bomber's inadequate welding skills, the slag inclusion phenomenon is quite obvious and there are still quite a lot of defects. Coupled with the fact that the threads on the tin were obviously cut by hand, Chen Chen could basically complete a profile of the bomber. A man working in a machining-related industry may be responsible for grinding and turning work. He didn't know where he came from, but he saw propaganda about JDism and soon became deeply involved in it. But for some reason, perhaps because of his background, or perhaps because of his relatively cowardly character, he was not able to successfully join the core of the organization. To this end, he planned to do something big to prove his loyalty and ability. Coincidentally, he heard the news that the organization was preparing to launch an attack on Qingshan Park, so he made his own explosives without the help of the organization, preparing to launch an attack with internal and external support. But when the time came, he finally gave up his plan. Maybe it was because he had no chance, or maybe it was because he had a change of heart. But it doesn't matter, because the moment the bomb was dropped, his life had already been destroyed by his own hands. Chen Chen dropped the iron kin in his hand and said to Shi Dakai and Bao Qi, who were sitting opposite him, "The processing characteristics are quite obvious. They are quite skilled in grinding and turning, but they are rubbish at welding. But the fact that he was able to find the equipment has helped us limit the scope of our investigation. The other party must have free access to a well-equipped machine shop, which further eliminates internal suspicion. How many machining factories with similar conditions are there near Qingshan Industrial Park?" After hearing Chen Chen's words, Bao Qi thought for a moment and replied, "I don't know the exact number, but it should be quite a lot. I remember when I drove by, I saw that there were still many repair shops and processing plants around. Including the dock, there seems to be a small-scale shipyard, which should have the same equipment. It's very difficult to investigate. Why not hand it over directly to the police? We must give it to them, but we also need to be aware of the situation." Chen Chen nodded in response, then looked in the direction of Shi Dakai. The latter remained silent, as if thinking about something. Chen Chen did not disturb him. At this moment, Shi Dakai suddenly said, "It is unlikely to be a machining plant, and even less likely to be a shipyard. The most likely place is still the auto repair shop." "Why?" Bao Qi asked doubtfully. "It's simple. The turning equipment here is very valuable. It is basically impossible for non-internal employees to be allowed to use it. At the same time, machine shops and shipyards are both high-intensity jobs, and no one can handle it. When I was in Laojia, I mined during the day and stood guard at the Allied Army camp at night. I could barely balance my energy. If you put yourself in my shoes, I definitely wouldn't choose two jobs that would drain me dry at the same time. The work at the auto repair shop is relatively easy. It's a very suitable choice. Of course, this is just a guess. Check, or check them all. But in terms of priority, we can start with the repair shop." "That makes sense." Chen Chen nodded and continued to ask, "How many repair shops are there near La Boda?" "Just one. I asked Zhang Yang before. Our car was damaged, and we need sheet metal repair." "Then go and have a look," Chen Chen said decisively. "It just so happens that we need to repair the car, so we have a reasonable reason. The only problem is that we don't know if he has any extra explosives. If we go over blindly to investigate, we'll be in trouble if he finds out he's lying in wait. It would be best to find someone from our side who is not their first target. This person must be a stranger and have a certain level of professionalism." Lin Chunming. Having said that, Chen Chen raised his head and met Shi Dakai's gaze. The latter lowered his voice and said that he is the most suitable candidate. The bomber must be a local employee. He is familiar with the old employees of Qingshan Park. And if we let the police go, it would really alert the enemy. It's only Lin Chunming. He came after the park was cleared. No one has seen him. Before confirming his identity, those JD elements will not rashly attack him. In this way, safety is definitely guaranteed. As for investigation, can he do it? You can try and let him take Nezha over. Chen Chen made the final decision, and soon, Bao Qi went out to find Lin Chunming and brought him over from his residence. The three explained their judgment and the risks of the operation. After hesitating for a moment, Lin Chunming said, "The risk is too high. This level of reconnaissance is equivalent to close combat. If there is a problem, there will be no time to evacuate. Besides, the actions of JD members are basically unpredictable, I feel." He didn't finish his words, but Chen Chen already understood what he meant. Although he was a little disappointed, Chen Chen did not force it. So he replied, "It doesn't matter, safety first. If you don't want to forget it, we can think of another way. Advertisement, it's not that I don't want to." Lin Chunming smiled somewhat embarrassedly and continued, "I mean, this is a high-risk and difficult thing. Can you give me some subsidies? Boss, I want to make some money here. House prices in China are getting higher and higher." Lin Chunming's request was beyond Chen Chen's expectations, but after thinking about it carefully, it was reasonable. "When I was just demobilized, I was thinking about how to make money all day long. After all, it is different in the local area than in the army. Food, drink, defecation, and urination all cost money. And there is also the issue of starting a family and buying a house. The pressure is extremely great." Lin Chunming's thoughts are actually the most normal human nature. What a joke. Who would work for free? Do you really think that people will bow down and obey you just by giving an order? Chen Chen was not afraid of others asking him for money. What he was afraid of was that someone would hide it and not make his demands clear, so that in the end, everyone would leave in a bad mood. Therefore, Lin Chunming's honesty made Chen Chen appreciate him even more, and he generously offered a price that seemed like a sky-high price to Lin Chunming, but was not even a drop in the bucket to the Dongfeng Corps. $20,000. Lin Chunming didn't hesitate for a second and agreed on the spot. So, the three of them introduced the task plan to him in detail and began to discuss the details of the subsequent implementation. According to their plan, Lin Chunming would go to the repair shop for investigation the next evening. He would bring Nezha with him. As long as any traces of explosives were found, the Dongfeng Corps would rush forward with all their men and directly pin down the suspect. The plan is simple but not crude. After confirming the details, Chen Chen immediately began to arrange a support team, and Lin Chunming also returned to his residence, intending to take the time to learn a few Indonesian sentences for simple communication. Just as they were preparing to conduct further investigation based on this clue, in the only auto repair shop in the city of La Boda, a man was skillfully operating a lathe under the light, cutting a broken axle. His face was full of fatigue, but he did not dare to relax his hands at all, because to him, this axle meant more than just a repair part, but breakfast for his family of 3 the day after tomorrow. That's right, not tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow. Because tomorrow's breakfast, he had already earned it yesterday. If we look at it purely from this logic, it seems that his life is not too bad. At least he can maintain a basic livelihood. For many poor people in Sulawesi who can't even afford to eat, it is even enough to make them envious. But Thinking from another perspective, he only has one day to make mistakes. What does this mean? If he took a sick leave one day, or simply because his subordinates were a little slow and failed to complete the repair of parts after work in the evening, it meant that his family would not have at least one meal. Of course, this isn't particularly cruel, just unusually depressing. He didn't understand why his life had become like this. He even felt that he had never done anything wrong. Before I was 20, I went to school, graduated, learned a craft, and worked diligently. There weren't too many ups and downs, but it was also very stable. At that time, he was indeed relaxed. His parents did not need to be supported, and if he ate enough, the whole family would not be hungry. He could even save some money to buy himself some cigarettes and alcohol as a comfort after hard work. However, this kind of life soon came to an end. What broke the peace were his marriage, his childbirth, and his 2 hungry children. He never thought about what having 3 more mouths to feed would mean to him. Nor did he ever think that one day he would risk his life to mine sulfur in a volcano. He truly realized his poverty, and also realized the heavy mountain and thick ceiling pressing down on him. It shouldn't be like this. I just followed the same path as everyone else in this world and got married according to my reproductive instinct as a human being. But why would such an ordinary thing push me into the abyss? There's a big problem in this world. Thinking of this, the man sighed. He steadied his hands, which were trembling slightly due to low blood sugar caused by not having eaten dinner, and completed the last step of cutting accurately. The axle was processed, but he did not turn off the machine. Instead, he put a forged iron can on the machine and quickly cut threads on it. He moved quickly, and after finishing, he immediately took the tin can off the machine and hid it in his backpack. Then he turned off the machine and walked to the lobby of the repair shop. A man with no hair sitting behind the counter walked up to him timidly and said, "Boss, we're done. Today there are 4 pieces, salary." Without even raising his head, the boss took out a few bills from a drawer nearby. The man took the bills and looked at them, seeming to want to say something, but in the end he swallowed his words. "Can I come during the day tomorrow?" He continued to ask. "No, I don't have that much work for you to do." The boss was still immersed in the Minesweeper game on his phone. The man was disappointed and was about to leave, but at this moment, the boss suddenly put down his phone and looked at the man, saying seriously, "Lufty, you should stay away from those imams." The man named Lufty was stunned for a moment, then replied, "I just need some teachings." "You need good teaching, not that kind of teaching." There was a hidden meaning in the boss's words. Lufty realized that he might know something, but he couldn't figure out the boss's attitude. He looked at his boss in confusion, wanting to ask something but not knowing how to start. The boss sighed softly and continued, "Don't think that no one knows what you did. Take some advice from someone who's been there. That's not what you should do. You're just a tool. Real benefits will never come to you. Do you know why I'm telling you this? Because what you are about to do will benefit me. I can make more money by driving those East Asians away. But what about you? This is the conscience I give you. Lufty, keep it. Do you really think you can go to heaven? That's just a lie. If anyone can go to heaven, it won't be a poor person like you." After hearing what his boss said, Lufty fell into a long silence. He remained silent and turned towards the door. But just after he stepped out of the door, he suddenly turned around and said, "I don't want to go to heaven, but maybe someone should get a feel for what hell is like." The next morning, Chen Chen drove the team to the repair shop to scout the area. They already knew that the bomber would most likely work part-time somewhere else after getting off work at the mine. So when the Qingshan Industrial Park just went on holiday, the bomber would most likely not have had time to adjust, and it would be impossible for him to find other part-time jobs in a short period of time. So if this person really did work part-time at the repair shop, then he would definitely not show up until at least the evening. The Dongfeng Corps can use this time to familiarize themselves with the surrounding environment and arrange an ambush location, so as to maximize the protection of Lin Qinyang's safety after the reconnaissance begins. A group of 4 people, including Lin, who were driving on the ring road around the island. The more than 1 meter wide sand pit that was created by the explosion on the beach was still there. The young children did not know where the sand pit came from and actually thought it was a natural cave. They inserted branches and leaves around it and built it into their fortress. Children always seek a sense of security in narrow, enclosed spaces, but Chen Chen couldn't help but feel a chill when he saw this scene. The car continued to move forward and soon passed the repair shop. Li Bang, who was driving, did not deliberately slow down, but continued to drive south. They drove forward aimlessly like tourists who had just arrived here. After arriving at a beach, they stopped the car and walked onto the beach pretending to rest, but in fact they were observing the terrain and looking for a suitable ambush site. The sea here is far from being clean. All kinds of garbage are floating on the turbid sea surface, and there is even human excrement that is obviously from nearby villages. The stench was so bad that everyone couldn't help but frown. I used to think Indonesia was a very wealthy country. Bali was so famous that I thought all places in Indonesia were like Bali on TV. Bao Chi said with emotion. His eyes were always fixed on the children who were floating in the sea. The children also looked back at him, but only paused for a moment and then looked back at the sea surface, trying to find something useful from the accumulated garbage. A floating, intact plastic bucket would make them cheer, and the occasional dead fish carcasses were thrown ashore, and it was unknown what they planned to do with them. After hearing what Bao Chi said, Chen Chen sighed softly and replied, "How can you expect a place where the average daily income is less than $2 to be rich? And this $2 is mixed with a lot of water. If you really calculate it, the daily income of the poor should be around $1. People at this income level account for more than 90% of Indonesia's total population. I remember telling you before that Sulawesi might be poorer than Myanmar. Now it seems that this is true. The interior of Sulawesi may be better, but the further you go toward the coast, the harder life becomes. This is counterintuitive, but it's true." After the words fell, Shurdekai on the side nodded and continued. "Is it mainly agricultural? Is the coastal area unsuitable for crop cultivation?" "Not entirely." Chen Chen shook his head and explained, "There are very complicated reasons involved and even a lot of political factors involved. However, this is not something that most poor people are aware of. They only know that their lives are hard, and they cannot get out no matter how hard they struggle. But I'm afraid they won't think about why. This has led to structural confusion in the whole of Sulawesi, and even in the whole of Indonesia. The people are in urgent need of some spiritual comfort. In this respect, Pubay is actually similar to Indonesia. It's just that Pubay is located in the East Asian cultural circle, and the influence of Buddhism is deeply rooted, so the form of expression is more peaceful. As for Indonesia, it can be said that most of the religions here have already moved towards JD. Absolute poverty is the breeding ground for JDism. It's the same everywhere. There used to be a saying that black and green places are the most chaotic. Looking at Indonesia, does this prove this point? Really? Shurdakai let out a long sigh, and everyone fell silent. Advertisement at this time. More than 10 minutes had passed, and the children in the sea had already come ashore. Bao Chi reached into his pocket, as if he wanted to take out some cash, but Chen Chen held his hand down. Don't give me any money, ever. Why? Bao Chi looked at Chen Chen in confusion and explained, I didn't intend to say more. Maybe it's just the money for a meal, and it won't cause any impact, right? It's not a question of whether it will have an impact or not. It's fine if you don't pay, but if you give money to any of them, you won't be able to leave today. They'll surround you until they've searched you thoroughly. Understood. Bao Chi immediately put the money back into his pocket and watched the children dragging their spoils away with a slightly indifferent look. After the child disappeared into the distant street, Bao Chi's sigh continued. The problems here seem to be even more difficult to solve than those in Pubay. That's right. Chen Chen nodded and replied, Pubay just lacks a unified and strong leadership, but this, forget it, it's none of our business. I found the location. It's behind the bushes opposite. It's very close to the street, and it takes no more than 20 seconds to get to the repair shop. It has good visibility and is within a safe range. Let's set this as observation post number 1. Let's go ahead and look around to find a suitable location. It took the 4 of them most of the day to get a complete understanding of the environment around the repair shop and select the starting position and observation point. The next step was to wait for the right opportunity for Lin Chunming to initiate the reconnaissance. Chen Chen, who was at the observation point, saw the situation in front of the repair shop through a telescope. At 6 o'clock in the evening, several workers covered in oil left the repair shop, and a moment later, a new group of workers walked in. They changed shifts. Chen Chen realized that the time was ripe, so he immediately ordered Lin Chunming. You can set off now. Be careful not to reveal any flaws. Clear. Lin Chunming's reply came from the other end of the radio, and a few minutes later, a Jeep Grand Cherokee, which was rarely seen on the streets, drove to the vicinity of the repair shop. Lin Chunming jumped out of the car with the dog and walked into the repair shop from the front. According to the plan, he would deliberately use his unproficient English to delay for a while to create an opportunity for Neza to search. Chen Chen thought that this step would take a long time, but he didn't expect that Lin Chunming walked out again after only 2 minutes. In the headphones, Chen Chen heard Lin Chunming's report. Neza's reaction was huge. There must be something inside. I don't dare stay in there anymore, for fear of alerting the enemy. How about it, boss? Do you want to close the net and see? Hearing his words, Chen Chen frowned and thought for a moment, then answered decisively. Close the net. Groups 1 and 2 will engage the enemy covertly and enter the repair shop. Group 3 will maintain firepower alert and control the surrounding exits. Group 4 will prepare to evacuate. Lin Chunming continued to hold them back and control Neza. Don't let him alert the enemy. Be careful. There are civilians inside. Try not to use lethal weapons. Clear. Upon hearing Chen Chen's order, all teams immediately took action. Chen Chen led Group 1 and Group 2 to set off first. They stuck in the blind spot of the repair shop and approached the front. Without any countdown, Chen Chen threw a stun grenade inside, and then the 6 people broke through the door in a standard bilateral formation. Group 2 quickly took control of all the people in the lobby. Get down! Get down! Lenny shouted loudly in the Indonesian language he had just learned. At this time, Chen Chen and Li Bang had already locked onto the narrow door leading to the rear of the repair shop and immediately threw the second stun grenade. The time interval between the 2 stun grenades exploding was no more than 5 seconds. After the loud noise, Chen Chen immediately ordered, "Release the dogs." Clear. Neza, who had been ready to move for a long time, rushed into the repair shop like the wind. Chen Chen made a gesture and gave an order. Neza, pounce. Woof. Neza roared as if in answer, then rushed into the rear workshop of the repair shop. Chen Chen and Li Bang followed closely behind. With Li Bang, who was wearing heavy armor, leading the way, Chen Chen didn't worry at all about the bullets that might be shot from all angles. In other words, the probability of encountering a gunman in the repair shop is relatively low. What they need to worry about more is that the bomber hiding in the workshop will find something unusual and detonate the bomb he may have in his hand. Therefore, there is only one requirement for the whole operation. That is, fast. Chen Chen's eyes quickly swept across the workshop. The 2 workers closest to the explosion point had fallen directly to the ground, apparently knocked unconscious by the huge sound and light effects of the stun grenade. There was a man still struggling in the distance. Chen Chen knew it was useless to shout at him at this time, so he patted Li Bang's shoulder. The latter immediately rushed over and hit the man with the butt of his gun, making him fall asleep completely. At the same time, the only worker still standing, who was farthest from the explosion point of the stun grenade, had been bitten tightly by Neza. He kept screaming and trying to break free, but the professionally trained military dog was not like the wild dog on the road that would only bite blindly. At the moment when Li Bang was dealing with his opponent, Neza had already dragged the man down. Then, instead of holding on according to his instinct, he immediately let go and bit the man's shoulder again. Ah! The screams were heard again, and Chen Chen quickly ran forward and ordered, "Neza, release." Neza obeyed the order and let go. Chen Chen kicked the worker on the ground under his ribs at the liver area. The severe pain made the other party bend down like a shrimp. Chen Chen no longer cared about him, but quickly raised his gun to be alert. At this time, Group 2 had completed the control of all personnel in the lobby and began to enter the workshop to assist in the cleanup. Soon, all the moving targets were identified, and all the workers who entered the factory for shift changes were pinned to the ground. At this time, less than a minute had passed since Chen Chen gave the order to start the attack calculations. The entire repair shop was completely under control, and Li Bang led the team to search all the rooms. In fact, there were only 3 rooms in the entire repair shop: lobby, workshop, and a toilet. It's not because the scale is too small, but because most of the work areas are set up in the open air, with at most a shed made of plastic cloth above the head. This undoubtedly reduced the difficulty of the Dongfeng Corps' search and arrest work. 5 minutes later, all the employees of the repair shop arrived and were taken to the lobby of the repair shop. Chen Chen did not conduct any interrogation on these people because he knew that a temporary interrogation was doomed to produce no results. Neza, search! Neza, who was squatting on the side and on guard, immediately ran over, sniffed around everyone, and finally locked onto the target. Chen Chen walked over and saw that the person Neza was instructing was one of the workers who was knocked unconscious by the stun grenade. And it was obvious that Neza was absolutely not wrong. Because even if Neza was not needed, Chen Chen himself could smell a faint smell of gunpowder on this person. This is a very typical smell of black powder. Not to mention dogs. Even ordinary people without professional training can smell the smell of gunpowder on him as long as they have set off firecrackers during the new year. As expected, Chen Chen's profile is roughly accurate. This bomber must be a novice, or in other words, a wild JD element. Take this person away and hand the others over to the police. Wake up the boss and find out his identity. Li Bang, treat the wounded man, take him to the hospital later, and give him some money. Chen Chen made arrangements quickly, and everyone took action immediately. Then, a basin of cold water was poured on them, and the boss, who was still in a coma, had to wake up. With just a few simple questions, Chen Chen obtained basic information about the worker. Lufti lives in the suburbs of Roboda. He has a wife and 2 children. He is one of the most ordinary poor people in Roboda, Sulawesi, and even in Indonesia. Chen Chen asked for Lufti's address, and Bao Chi at the side used the map to determine the specific location. After thinking for a moment, Chen Chen directly pulled the boss up. Come with us and find his home. The boss's face was full of fear. He said a series of Indonesian words that Chen Chen could not understand. Chen Chen frowned slightly and ignored him. Instead, he dragged him out of the door and threw him onto the Land Cruiser that was already in place. At the same time, the police had also arrived. They arrived so late that it seemed as if they really knew nothing about the Dongfeng Corps' actions. In fact, Chen Chen had already informed Argus a long time ago, but because he did not trust the efficiency of the police, he chose to let his team act alone. What else? When the police show up, have a friendly conversation with the boss first, and then send someone in to search slowly, not to mention whether they can find anything. By the time their people show up at the door, the suspect may have already become alert and disposed of all the evidence, or may have been silenced by others. Only an unreasonable and sudden action like the Dongfeng Corps can ensure the achievement of the goal. Of course, their actions were indeed somewhat extreme. After all, they caused injuries to people who were most likely unrelated to the incident. But who cares? Chen Chen had already prepared a budget for them. In Indonesia, as long as no one was killed, there was no problem that could not be solved with money. Soon, Chen Chen completed the handover with the police. He picked a police officer who was good at English and took him into the car. Then the group drove to the suburbs of Laboda according to the boss's instructions. Looking at Lufti in the car, the police officer looked a little surprised. He turned Lufti's face and asked Chen Chen, "Sir, are you sure it's him?" Advertisement. Chen Chen nodded and replied, "It is basically certain that he smells like gunpowder." "Can't you smell it?" "Though I just find it a little weird that I can smell it." "Unbelievable? What do you mean?" Chen Chen frowned slightly and asked in confusion. It's hard to explain, but Lufti was an honest man. He was even a good citizen. In 2007, he was commended by the police for reporting JD activities. I personally presented him with the award. Could he be the bomber? Good citizen? Commendation? Except for the driver, everyone in the 7-seater car turned their heads subconsciously. They really couldn't connect these 2 words with the man in front of them. Although there were indeed many JD elements who disguised themselves as good identities, the ragged man in front of them was obviously not that kind of person. That is to say, in just a few years, his mentality has changed dramatically from a good man with a strong sense of justice who stood on the opposite side of the JD elements, to one of them. Looking at the expressions of the crowd, the police officer was stunned for a moment and replied, "Yes, the good citizen commendation is anonymous because it involves EIM members. So, this matter has not been made public, but I know about it." Hearing his words, Chen Chen nodded silently and did not ask any more questions. The car drove all the way, passing through the main urban area of La Boda, and arrived at the so-called suburbs in a few minutes. In fact, the suburbs here are completely different from the suburbs in the conventional sense. It has not enjoyed any radiation effect from the urban area. Although La Boda is not big, the urban area and the suburbs are simply 2 separate worlds. The place was so dilapidated that it was even grotesque. Chen Chen had never looked closely at it before, but now, when he really saw those houses built with tree trunks and rough wooden boards, even Chen Chen, who had some understanding of the situation here, felt a heavy sense of corruption. The land is dying, and the people on this land are dying. He vaguely realized that there were more complicated root causes behind this failed attack, but for the moment he couldn't think too deeply about it. Following the instructions of the repair shop owner, the car stopped in front of a wooden house that was no different from the surrounding houses. All the members of the Dongfeng Corps got out of the car and quickly deployed in combat formation. Yang Shu and Aijiao led the team on alert to guard against possible attacks. The nearby terrain is open, so they have enough time to react and their safety is basically guaranteed. Chen Chen did not let Lufti get out of the car, but left 2 people to watch him and tie his mouth. Before getting off the car, he saw the deep despair and unwillingness in Lufti's eyes, but this did not cause any emotional fluctuations in Chen Chen. He was just curious about the story behind this man, and curious about how big a root he could dig out from him. Hearing the voices of people and cars, Lufti's children rushed out the door first, purely out of childish curiosity, but when they saw the daunting equipment of the Dongfeng Corps, they immediately turned around and ran back into the house, shouting "Mom," and hid behind Lufti's wife, who came rushing over after hearing the noise. If this picture were captured by certain media, it might even become the most heartbreaking photo of the year and win the Pulitzer Prize. The cold muzzle of the gun, the heavy armor, the terrifying mask, the pervasive smell of killing. And the innocent children, the mothers with vigilant faces, the dilapidated houses behind them, and the tattered clothes on their bodies. Coupled with the firewood that the mother was waving as a weapon, the conflict and emotions were at their peak. But Chen Chen just raised his gun calmly, as always, and shouted in Indonesian, which he had just learned. Leave and stand aside. Hands up, weapons down. We need to search. Don't hurt yourself. Hearing his words, Lufti's wife immediately dropped the stick in her hand and quickly pulled the child to hide aside. This action is not difficult to understand. After all, for her, what is there to protect in these shabby houses? Chen Chen made a gesture to Li Bang, who, together with the police officers who followed him, drove the three people aside and controlled them. Chen Chen then led the team into the room and began to search. Safety. Safety. There were only 3 rooms, so the search did not take them much time. Under the bed in the so-called bedroom, Chen Chen found the unfinished tank of a homemade bomb, discarded circuit boards, and a small amount of black powder. Seeing these things, Chen Chen breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, we didn't catch the wrong person. It's confirmed to be him. Keep looking to see if there are any other clues. Clear. Everyone split up, and after clearing away a lot of junk, they found something that definitely shouldn't belong in this environment, a lot of papers with words on them. These things certainly cannot be called books, as most of them are just flyer-like items printed on A4 paper. Chen Chen took all the things out of the house and handed them to the police officer for translation, and the result was exactly as he expected. These are all materials to promote JDism. The fire has been lit here, and it will continue to burn. Pick up your arms and fight, my brothers. Wash away the memories of a century of slavery. If you continue to sleep in ignorance, the nightmare will continue. Very typical, but not in the style of EM or even JIS. What's the difference? Chen Chen asked. If it were these two organizations, they would focus more on emphasizing truth, faith, God, and the like, but this. Hearing the police officer's words, Chen Chen nodded slightly, understanding the difference. This batch of propaganda materials has a clear de-religious trend. Rather than saying it is JD propaganda, it is better to say it is color GM in the guise of JD. Damn, what is going on? Is the composition of Indonesia so complicated? Chen Chen frowned as he kept flipping through the materials. And as he was flipping through them, a banknote that had obviously been carefully preserved fell out. And on the banknote, someone wrote a line of words with a pen in English. Send the devil back to hell. Half an hour later, Qingshan Park, Dongfeng Corps Office. Chen Chen sat opposite Lufti, who had been freed from his restraints, and just looked at him quietly without saying a word. This was a fairly routine interrogation technique, and it was obvious that Lufti on the other side had not received any professional anti-interrogation training. After only staring at each other for a dozen seconds, he was defeated and could not help but say, "What exactly do you want to do? Just tell me. It doesn't matter if you want to kill me, but justice will definitely be done." The translator at the side simultaneously conveyed Lufti's words. Chen Chen listened and looked at Lufti's expression, and for a moment he couldn't help but laugh. Justice? Maybe he really felt that what he was doing was the right thing. He was completely unaware of his own stupidity and even thought that he was the awake one. Well, to put it bluntly, he was comparable to some awakened people he was familiar with. So, Chen Chen ignored him at all, but continued to remain silent and left him alone. Getting him to speak is only the first step. Making him voluntarily state his intentions is the advanced interrogation. Of course, this process will be much longer. After waiting for 10 minutes, Lufti spoke again. "I know who you are. You are from the Eastern Army. You are not our enemies. It's just that you chose the wrong master. You are here for the money. That's fine, but don't you know? What they can give you, we can give you too. This is justice. This is the way things should really be. At least, we won't use the flesh and blood of the lower class to feed those demons like them." Demon? Chen Chen finally interrupted Lufti and asked, "Who is the devil in your eyes?" "Bureaucrats, businessmen, and all those who exploit and oppress us. I know you think we are no different from those molecules. No, we are totally different from them. Yes, we also want to fight for the rights that all our brothers deserve, but our conflict with those demons is definitely not just a religious conflict. These are just appearances. Don't you understand? All ideological conflicts are essentially conflicts of interests." Chen Chen was somewhat surprised by what Lufti said. He really couldn't understand why he could hear such an argument as religious conflicts are conflicts of interest from this person's mouth. He clearly felt that the organization that Lufti belonged to was not EIM or JIS, but something else. I know, it was certainly not Hezbollah, let alone Hamas. It is a complex, extreme, and in many cases very difficult to define organization, ISK Khorasan. This thing is the product of internal conflicts between IS and Taliban, and is often regarded as a Taliban rebel concentration camp. Their ideology is, to some extent, even more extreme than that of IS. They're a very radical group among the fundamentalist Wahhabis. They even completely disregard basic universal values and human empathy and attack schools, hospitals, and churches. They have been notorious since their inception. However, if you really study their so-called doctrine, you will find that the philosophy of this organization is purely a patchwork. They want to get involved in religion, human rights, social equality, the gap between the rich and the poor, and even environmental protection. They are against everything and believe that apart from them, all other superiors are the embodiment of the devil, including Taliban and IS. That's right, they are even in competition with the JD organization. The reason is actually very simple, which is what Lufti calls a problem of interests. They are weak and need to win support from many parties, so they must create many concepts to cater to the demands of all parties and attract more ignorant people to join their resistance. The reason why Chen Chen knew about this organization was actually very simple, because they were connected with ETLO. Not only did they provide ETLO with a lot of intelligence and financial support, they even released propaganda songs specifically for the North. This thing has always been the focus of attack. Even if Chen Chen is not on that line, he has heard of it. Thinking of this, Chen Chen's face darkened. He asked directly, "Are you ISK?" Hearing his words, Lufti was stunned for a moment. but soon his expression became proud again. Yes, I have nothing to hide. We are ISK. You know us, so you must know us too. You should know the difference between us and them. And you should also know that what we're going to do is different from what they do. So, you should wake up. What we do is for the benefit of everyone, not just one group. You made a bomb and wanted to kill innocent people. Chen Chen interrupted Lufti again, and the latter was forced to swallow the words that were about to come out of his mouth. After a long time, he spoke. This is a forced choice. GM is bound to be accompanied by sacrifice, but their sacrifice is valuable. They will create a better future for others. Otherwise, do you think they have any other way to go? What options are there for ordinary people here? Everyone is the same, doing the hardest work but unable to save a single penny. When they die, they pass on the poverty gene to the next generation. Someone has to do something to change this. Instead of living in obscurity, why not die with glory for a bright future? Hearing his words, Chen Chen was speechless. It has to be said that his remarks were extremely misleading, and even many people with insufficient cognitive abilities were directly misled by him. Resist the powerful, change the status quo, and speak up for the weak. These three words will have unparalleled appeal to the public at any time and in any place, because human beings naturally pursue interests, and the experience of interest does not arise from real feelings, but rather from a process of comparison. To put it simply, it is a question of why. However, if you really accept his ideas, you will be fooled. You want to change the status quo, but why do you use other people's fate as a bargaining chip? Why do you make choices for others? Why do you spend money on others? This is not selflessness, it is just extreme selfishness. Okay, let's stop here. I'm not interested in discussing these vague things with you. I just want to know who gave you the materials, who your superior is, and what your plan is. No comment. Lufti shook his head firmly. Chen Chen laughed contemptuously and said, You don't really think you're doing something great, do you? It should be said that you don't know what you are doing at all. Do you think you can change this place? Wrong. You can't change anything. If the direction is wrong, the harder you work, the more mistakes you will make. What good can you gain from attacking ordinary people? You will only become more and more detached from the masses, from the ordinary people you call need to be saved. We are not targeting ordinary people. Lufti immediately denied it. I've said before that my action targets the Qingshan group. It shouldn't be here. It has taken away the interest that should belong to us and ordinary people. Therefore, it must be eliminated. It was tricked out. Advertisement Chen Chen's tense mood relaxed. He was now completely certain that this Lufti was just a cannon fodder being used. There are people above him, and their purpose is very clear, which is to attack Qingshan Park. As a result, the situation faced by Qingshan Group has become more complicated. Although the enemy is still the same, the enemy has more and more tools. JIS and EM are not enough, and now there is ISK. Mobilizing so many forces is definitely not an easy task. If the other party does not have a grand ambition, they would not have to pay such a high cost. The Americans definitely want the current president to step down. We are now in Susilo's second term, which is also the most critical intermediate period. Everything that happened during this period hit him hard. The motive is quite clear. The problem now is how to sort out the chain of evidence from top to bottom and establish the strike coordinates. I have to continue to cheat. So, Chen Chen continued to question. Will you gain benefits if you destroy Qingshan Group? When Qingshan Group was around, you could get a salary here to support your life. The money you used to buy the gunpowder and materials came from your salary, right? Isn't it ridiculous? Without this money, you wouldn't even have the ability to resist in the most extreme way. And now, because of your actions, hundreds of people will lose the opportunity to work in Qingshan Park. You didn't save anyone, on the contrary. You indirectly killed many people. Lufti looked at Chen Chen in astonishment. His psychological defenses seemed to have been touched, but in the end, he just said stubbornly, their sacrifice was worth it. Valuable? What's the value? Chen Chen did not hide his contempt, but continued. You are just tools. You probably don't even know who the biggest boss of ISK is. You don't think this is a pure resistance organization, do you? Stop it. I'm really curious. What would you think if you knew that the boss of ISK is the biggest vested interest you are against? Boss. Lufti raised his head suddenly and said subconsciously, We don't have a boss. Without a boss, where do you think the funds for this organization's activities come from? ISK is nothing more than a vicious dog raised by the United States. When they need you, they will release you to bite people. When they don't need you, they will shoot you to death from a distance. How ridiculous. You still think you were fighting for your own interests, but in fact you were just a tool of certain forces. At this point, Lufti's expression had changed a little. Perhaps he also realized that there was indeed something wrong with the organization he was involved in. Seizing this opportunity, Chen Chen struck while the iron was hot and said, I didn't learn that English sentence by yourself, did you? You know what? That's an American proverb. Actually, it's a fucking American proverb, just a very common and inflammatory slogan. But Chen Chen's confident expression made Lufti believe it. His expression suddenly froze on his face, as if he had suffered some huge shock. Then he muttered to himself, Impossible, absolutely impossible. Seeing his performance, Chen Chen realized that the time was right. You can't keep asking, you have to give him time. Give him time to fantasize. Give him time to deny and doubt himself. Give him time to make a final decision. Leave him alone for a few hours or even a few days. When his self-doubt reaches its peak, give him a push and all his resistance will disappear without a trace. Such a push can be simple torture, but it can also include other threats. Maybe it's not humane, but Chen Chen doesn't care. Who cares whether you have your own reasons or not, or why you went astray? You were innocent, but you joined ISK and created original sin for yourself. So, what obligation do I have to forgive you? There is no need to revive a damn person. Chen Chen left Lafooty alone for a night as planned, and then Shi Dakai began to enter the scene. I have to say that Shi Dakai really has a special talent when it comes to interrogation. Perhaps it is because of his own natural pessimism that he can easily see the most pessimistic side of everything, and with this talent he can easily grasp the other party's weaknesses. Chen Chen originally thought that he would need to use some traditional skills on Lu Futi, but unexpectedly, Shi Dakai did not use any props at all. Less than 20 minutes after entering, Lu Futi confessed directly. Of course, this was not entirely Shi Dakai's credit. It should be said that Chen Chen's preparation is also crucial. But this did not stop Chen Chen from being curious. When Shi Dakai walked out of the interrogation room and arranged the subsequent interrogation matters, Chen Chen immediately walked up to him and asked, "How did you do it? What and how?" Shi Dakai asked subconsciously, "How did you get him to talk? I mean, ISK is basically a very determined organization. It must be difficult to get him to talk, right?" Shi Dakai smiled and replied, "It's actually not that hard to find the weak spot." "So what's his weakness?" Chen Chen continued to ask. He was really a little worried that Shi Dakai would say something shocking again. After all, his mother-daughter plan last time had a huge impact. But this time, Shi Dakai's answer was much more normal. "I just asked him a question. I asked him what he hoped to gain after doing all these things, and the most direct answer was how much money he hoped to make. He told me it was at least $2,000 a month. Then I told him that we were offering a $20,000 reward for a dog to catch him. But of course, that was a lie. But he was already a little overwhelmed, so after hearing it, he collapsed instantly." Chen Chen was stunned. $20,000 for a dog? For Lufty, this was probably a real murder.